We're called the Midnight Society. We're just a group of ordinary people who like to gather around the campfire once a week to share scary stories in the dark. But my question to you is, are you afraid of the dark? Hi, welcome back to How to Train Your Gavin. In this video, I will be celebrating all things to do with Nickelodeon's Are You Afraid of the Dark? A TV show that was very popular in the 90s that became such an integral part of my childhood along with Goosebumps. And Are You Afraid of the Dark just followed a group of kids who loved scary stories and loved to spook each other around the campfire. And I don't know about you, but I always wanted to be part of the Midnight Society. So in today's video, I am going to be going through the 23 books that were released during the original show's run in the 90s, in the hopes that once I am done telling you these scary stories, that I will also be initiated into the Midnight Society. The books include The Tale of the Sinister Statues, The Tale of Cutter's Treasure, The Tale of the Restless House, The Tale of the Nightly Neighbours, The Tale of the Secret Mirror, The Tale of the Phantom School Bus, The Tale of the Ghost Riders, The Tale of the Deadly Diary, The Tale of the Virtual Nightmare, The Tale of the Curious Cat, The Tale of the Zero Hero, The Tale of the Shimmering Shell, The Tale of the Three Wishes, The Tale of the Campfire Vampires, The Tale of the Bad-Tempered Ghost, The Tale of the Souvenir Shop, The Tale of the Ghost Cruise, The Tale of the Pulsating Gate, The Tale of the Sinking Shadow, The Tale of the Egyptian Mummies, The Tale of the Terrible Toys, The Tale of the Mogul Monster, and The Tale of the Horrifying Hockey Team. I have my Midnight Dust, so I hope you're ready. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society, I call this story The Tale of the Are You Afraid of the Dark book series. Before I get into what I gave the first two stories, because I've now read the first two, can I just tell you how hard it was to find all of the Are You Afraid of the Dark books? Seriously, they are out of print, they are out of stock, they haven't been in print since the 90s essentially, and it cost me around about $565 to get all 23 of them, and it took about a year to find and collect them all too. So can we just appreciate that effort right now? Like the video. So I have finished the first two books, and can I just say as well, it is so lovely to be back in the Are You Afraid of the Dark universe and to read and feel like I am in an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode. I know they've tried to reboot the show a couple of times, and it just doesn't quite hit the same. You know, there's something about the 90s, something about children telling scary stories to one another in the 90s that really resonates. And it's the same with Goosebumps. You know, it doesn't matter how many times you reboot the show or R.L. Stine writes new Goosebumps books, you just can't really quite replicate that feeling of the 90s. I was born in 1992, so most of my childhood was being raised in the 90s. So it is a little bit weird to go back to that. So the first story is The Tale of the Sinister Statues, and this one was written by John Peel. I love that on the front here it has a thing, a competition. You could win a visit to Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando, Florida. No purchase required. Must be 14 or younger. Void in Puerto Rico. Contest ends December 29th, 1995. See inside for more details. Seeing old advertisements at the end of these like really nostalgic books that came out in the 90s is just so amazing. Like, one grand prize, a weekend, 4 days and 3 nights trip to Nickelodeon Studios. 3 first prizes, a Nickelodeon collection of 10 videos. Remember those? Remember VHS tapes? 25 second prizes, a Clarissa board game. So that would be Clarissa Explains It All. And 53rd prizes, 1 year subscription to Nickelodeon magazine. Oh my god, it's just so good. I love collecting really old books. This was $3.99 when it first came out, and it cost me an arm and a leg to get them all now. All of the stories as well seem to, I mean, at least the first two that I read, start with a prologue of the Midnight Society, and it's essentially welcoming you in, giving you a little rundown of the story that you're about to hear, and then ends the prologue with, submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society, I call this story The Case of the Sinister Statues. It's just so nice being back with this. I really wanted friends to meet up with in the middle of the woods around a campfire and do something like this. I really did. So it's nice to get back into that. So this book does follow Brienne and Dustin. They are brother and sister. And Brienne and their friend Tim love to prank Dustin. They essentially make his life hell with all of these pranks. And I was a little bit concerned because one of the reasons why I love and hate Goosebumps is the fact that 90% of the stories is just one big prank, and the Goosebumps stories end up not being scary at all. So I was kind of worried that the Are You Afraid of the Dark books would go that route. But fortunately, the first two books that I read, they are real. So the stories that we're being told, it's not a fake out. They're not just a dream. It's not just one big prank. Like, these are real scary stories. I mean, scary is a loose term, isn't it? And obviously I'm not in the age demographic anymore, so I'm trying to remember how I felt at that time of my life and what I would have considered scary then, and if I think it does a good job at portraying that, if it feels like an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode. So I do know a lot of the Are You Afraid of the Dark books that were released are brand new stories. I will say though, the next book that I'm about to talk about soon as well, The Tale of Cutter's Treasure, I believe that this was a television show episode. I think it was a two-parter in season 4, but I think this might be the only book that was like a novelization of an episode, but I'll probably get to the rest of them and let you know if that's the case. But The Tale of the Sinister Statues, I think, is an original brand new story, which I really did like. I liked this story a lot. There was a sort of crazy scientist element to this that I wasn't the biggest fan of, but I liked what they were doing. So essentially, Dustin, Brienne, and Tim, I always get character names so mixed up because there are so many different characters brought into these books, but they go to a museum and they see like these kind of real life looking statues, but there's also statues that look like they shouldn't belong there. One day they are caught causing mischief in this museum, and Dr. Stone, which is like so on the nose, he catches them and he punishes Tim. He's like, okay, I've got paperwork that you have to file, so you're coming with me. So he does that. However, Tim then goes missing, and Dustin and Brienne have to try and find him, and they realize his bike is still outside the museum, and the last person who saw him was Dr. Stone, but Dr. Stone said, oh, he left hours ago. But he kind of didn't. So the next day when they go to the museum, they see a statue that looks exactly like Tim. And that kind of story does like creep me out a little bit, because the idea of being turned to stone is like such a... Well, not even just turned to stone, but I don't know if you've seen, but I did a massive Junji Ito reading vlog recently, and there was a story that Junji Ito wrote where like, this concrete was poured over real life people and it turned them into a statue, essentially, so you could see their death kind of immortalized in a statue. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind as I was reading this, and that made me creeped out even more. It is pretty direct and pretty straightforward, this entire story, and I think it really works because I think this bridges the gap between like middle grade and teen, especially young teen, because I mean sometimes it did feel a little bit silly in terms of like the theatricality of Dr. Stone, because he is the villain. He is the one who is transferring the life force from a real person to a statue. So for instance, I believe it was Anubis, who is I think the Egyptian god of death or something. I need to brush up on my Egyptian mythology, but it does make the statue come to life. But the way that Dr. Stone kind of presents himself, it's so theatrical, it's so silly, the way he explains everything, the way that he should just shut up and just do his job is kind of silly, and I love that though. I do love that. It's very 90s. Yeah, the body of the Anubis was that of a healthy young man, but the head was still that of a jackal. So I love the imagery of the fact that the statues come to life, but he looks like a real person, but he still retains that jackal head, which is kind of scary. You know, it's a combination of a young man's body with a canine head. Actual real life children are getting kidnapped and turned into statues so that their life force can make the statues come alive, which I think is a really good idea. But it's kind of quotes like, "Or be quiet," from Dr. Stone. "It's hard to concentrate with all your blubbering. You'll soon be silent forever." In the way that he talks to Brad is one of the bullies who gets turned into stone. Dr. Stone says, "You're disgusting. This process won't kill you, but from your point of view, what it will do is much better. It will drain all of your life energy out of you, reducing you to a shell of yourself, a statue. I hope you make a good statue, because you make a pretty miserable human being." And it's just like, the things that he says to like these children is just really cartoonish villain kind of way. way. You see, little rat, he told Brad. Pericles here was once a statue like Anubis. Then yesterday I caught another disgusting little boy like you. I took his life force and transferred it into Pericles here. Now that boy's a statue upstairs and Pericles is alive. Like, the way he explains everything, it's funny. Like, I'm not using it against this book because, you know, this is just the thing, isn't it, for like these kind of books in this age range. They do this a lot. Goosebumps did it a lot too, and I had to learn to not use it against Goosebumps as much as I did. But he really doesn't need to explain himself. Like, a lot of the stuff that we're told is told through dialogue. So instead of showing us the horror of someone being turned into a statue, we're kind of told everything before it happens, so that when it does happen, it kind of lessens the impact. But again, I know this is a teen book, and an old teen book at that. But yeah, I did really like it. I will say Brienne was very annoying. I mean, again, I know they're children, but like, she was just horrible. Like, she wasn't really that nice. She does like to prank her brother a lot, but the way she judges other people too is just so mean. But again, she's a child, so I have to kind of let that slide. And then we do end with an epilogue of the Midnight Society. I hereby declare this meeting of the Midnight Society closed. And again, like, it is good. I do think the resolution of this was quite fast, and I feel like this is just going to be the case for every single Are You Afraid of the Dark book, because I'm pretty sure most of the episodes did resolve themselves pretty quickly. So once you know these things going into it, you can kind of accept it. So Anubis, yeah, I guess he is the judge of life and death, isn't he? And he realizes what Dr. Stone is doing is wrong. So it's Anubis who ends up saving the day. And that's how, like, Dustin, Brienne, Tim, and even the bully get saved, and that was through Dr. Stone's own creation. I am the decider, explained Anubis. It is my function to judge right from wrong, good from evil. I was reminded my purpose by the boy, and I must be true to it. I've made my decision. This work of yours is wrong, and it must end. And that's essentially how it ends. So it is still really good, and again, I really enjoy these kinds of stories. They just remind me of childhood. I'm going to give each book a rating out of 5, and I do think I would give this one a good 3 out of 5. I think it's a good starting point. Not really that much to complain about. So the next book, The Tale of Cutter's Treasure, is the one that I believe is a Are You Afraid of the Dark episode that became novelized. So it does have, I think, stills from the episode, and also apparently it glows in the dark, which it kind of still does. I love the fact that these old books from the 90s can still glow in the dark. That's so cool. This one I didn't love as much. I think it started off really well because we had the idea of a ghost pirate, Captain Cutter, and obviously, like, the name alone is kind of terrifying because Cutter, you know, sword, cutting people, it is kind of scary. And I love the fact that we started off the first chapter with a flashback between Keegan, was it Keegan? Yeah, it was. Keegan, who was Captain Cutter's enemy, and Captain Cutter, and they're having a battle, and Captain Cutter is saying, I'm going to guard this treasure forever. And then we cut into the present day with Rush and his brother Max kind of play fighting, and that kind of transition was like so seamless and so good too. I really like that, especially since it turns out that Rush and Max are the descendants of Keegan, who was Cutter's sworn enemy. So I love the idea of ghost pirates. I love swashbuckling adventures so much. Honestly, like, they're some of my favorite stories, but I didn't love it as an Are You Afraid of the Dark story. I thought we moved too far away from what made it scary to what made this a fun adventure. It started to feel very Goonies, and The Goonies is one of my favorite films of all time, but again, as an Are You Afraid of the Dark book, it just didn't scare me, and I thought it kind of wasted the initial premise of a ghost pirate kidnapping Max and Rush, his big brother, having to try and save him. Because then it just started getting to, oh, this dagger and this, like, spyglass and all of these items are your destiny, and it's these, you're gonna have a fight with Captain Cutter to save your brother. It started to get too fantastical, so heavy into the fantasy that I just don't find fantasy scary. And I know what you're gonna say, it's like, oh, but you're too old for this, Gavin, now. For one, I'm only 31, okay? That's not old at all, and I'm still a child at heart. But once we moved from, because actually it started off so well, especially with the ghost pirate, and it was actually really gross. It was so gross. Yeah, so it's when Max is in his bedroom and the ghost is under his bed. Like, this whole thing is kind of scary. From under the bed, the hand grabbed his ankle. Max gasped. The hand had no skin. It was the bony hand of a living skeleton. And there's like even descriptions, if I can find them. Oh, here we go. The ghost looked worse than he had in Rush's dream. His face was grimy and his head tilted to one side, as if the bloody slash in his neck had cut the muscles that allowed him to lift it. There are some like gross visuals, especially to do with the ghost, that I really liked. I really liked them, but again, like it got too fantasy for me to feel any kind of terror. One thing I did love about it as well is the relationship between Max and Rush. So Rush being the big brother, he sees Max as an annoying younger brother who gets in the way when Rush wants to kiss his like sweetheart Sandy, and Max does seem to ruin a lot of moments for him. But as the story progresses, we really see this bond between brothers, and I actually watched, where is it? I have a Blu-ray of the first 7 seasons of Are You Afraid of the Dark. I actually watched the first few episodes the other day to get me in the mood for Are You Afraid of the Dark again, and the very first episode was the tale of the phantom cab, and there were 2 brothers, and one of them gets the other brother lost in the woods, and by the end of the story, their bond kind of brings them together, and it's really nice to see. So it's very similar in this book. The brotherly bond is so well explored, so well developed, and I was rooting for them. I was rooting for both of them. They were pretty good characters, honestly. I just didn't like the whole like, oh, this is your destiny to stop Captain Cutter, and there is a bit of a final battle with him, but it doesn't really see it all the way through. And again, like the resolution is quite easy. But I will say I would give this one a 2 out of 5. Love the brotherly dynamic. I love piratey adventure stories, but not as an Are You Afraid of the Dark book. I will watch the episodes though. I do believe that these were in season 4, so I'm going to watch the episodes, see if maybe it translates a bit more scarily on screen than it did in book format, and watch that, because I just don't remember anything about that episode. There are so many episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark that I cannot remember, but I just remember watching it, you know? But I do feel like so far the $565 I spent on these books was worth it. Let's see if I still think that later on when I read more of the books. It is later in the day, I'm still drinking coffee, and I really should stop by now if I want to wind down for bed later. But I have finished 2 more Are You Afraid of the Dark books. These are so quick and easy to read, honestly. And even though they're not blowing me away just yet, we are still early in the series, so there's still time. They are still such a joy to read. So this book, The Tale of the Restless House, I think was a bit of a missed opportunity, because we have this kind of haunted house story that takes such a turn that made it so bonkers in a way, like quite ridiculous, and it kind of took away some of the enjoyment that I was initially having for this story. Our main kind of character is someone called Kendra. She has these group of friends who are pranksters and not the best kinds of people to hang out with, and they want to prank Adam. And Adam is somebody who has a crush on Kendra. Kendra has a crush on Adam, and so she lies to Adam about going on a date and takes him to this haunted house that this guy called Nathan had initially gone into to set up a prank for him. There's also another friend, I think her name was Nicole or Nikki. And what I really started to enjoy about this story was, again, I love haunted house stories, but the warning signs were pretty much straight away when we have the stuff about the prank, because I'm like, wow, 90s kids really did love pranks, didn't they? And I guess in the YouTube era of the 2010s, that kind of came back. But yeah, most of the Goosebumps books is pranks, or kids loving to pull pranks. And I'm just like, I grew up in the 90s. I don't remember pranks being this prominent. But what I love about the Are You Afraid of the Dark books, again, is because they are real. These are real scares. They might start off as a prank, but it's not going to pull the wool over your eyes as a reader and be like, oh, all of this was fake, like what R.L. Stine does 90% of the time. So I really like the fact that we did have Nathan go in to set the prank in the house while the others go to get Adam. And I like the end of the first chapter. It says, it was unfortunate that Kendra, Nicole, and Joshua were too far away from the house by now, and meant that none of them heard Nathan's screams. And that's just like kind of a bit spooky, like really, really spooky. So I was like, okay, like this is actually going to be like a really scary story. And I do need to reconfigure my definition of scary, because I feel like reading books that are meant for a teen, young teen, upper middle grade audience is not going to hit the same for me. And I also need to realize that these are kids themselves in this book. But honestly, when I tell you, all of the kids are just so like, not good. Like, they're not great kids. They do kind of learn morals by the end of it, which is great, like, especially Adam and Kendra. They do like one another, and this whole prank thing drives a wedge between them, which is not great, but they do learn to kind of overcome that, and Kendra learns to, like, apologize, and Adam's a bit of a dick. Honestly, like, the way that he talks to people is quite condescending and quite mean. I know that, like, he was justified in the beginning because they were about to pull this prank on him, and they led him into this haunted house that now won't let them escape. This is kind of the main story of this book. We have a house that won't let the kids escape, but the way he just, like, treats people and the way that he talks to them by the end of it, I was like, oh my god, okay, we get it. You know, he's pissed about what happened to him. That's absolutely fine. That's justified. But again, like, it just continuously goes under the belt so many times with the other characters. I'm just like, I'm actually getting really fed up with you now. Kendra can be quite mean. Nikki can be very whiny, which again, like, you're stuck in a haunted house, of course. But the characters never really got to be likable until the very end, and I think Adam and Kendra were the only ones who did end up coming out of this a bit favourably. And again, I do feel sorry for Adam to have been dragged into this. And I do feel like a lot of the overcoming of what does happen in this book is down to just dumb luck, more so than actual character agency. Again, that's fine. But then things really started to get weird. And I think this ended up becoming too bizarre and too, I guess, science fiction of a book to really feel like it is supposed to be scary. And after researching the author as well, John Peel, he apparently wrote a lot of Doctor Who books, which makes sense. It makes sense that we would land into some wacky sci-fi adventures in this book, but I think it really lets it down because, like, we have a saber-toothed tiger come into this, we have a jungle appear outside, we have a war reenactment also happen outside, and also dinosaurs. And all of that mashed together, it's just odd. It's really bizarre, and it just detracted so much from the genuine fright to just downright goofiness. And I like the idea of the house kind of transporting certain elements through time. So yeah, there's one point where they do manage to get out the back door kind of thing, and they go into this big prehistoric jungle, and there is a dinosaur and it chases them, and things like that could be scary. But again, I'm going to mention why it gets really silly in a minute. Can I just say as well, I wasn't the biggest fan of the way John Peel writes female characters. So this is his second Are You Afraid of the Dark book, right? The first one, The Tale of the Sinister Statues, he also wrote, and the main female characters he writes are so damn right unlikable, and they are so mean and awful, really. So he did the same thing in The Sinister Statues. I think it was the sister Brienne, yeah. She's so snappy and mean, because in this moment Kendra is berating her best friend Nikki, and Nikki's crying and she's scared. Kendra tells her, pull yourself together. Nikki says, how can you say that? You're supposed to be my best friend. And Kendra says, well, I just quit, snapped Kendra. I've just had enough of your whining, so knock it off. And the exact same writing, the exact same personality of this character is the exact same as the main female character from the first book that John Peel wrote. And it's funny because I immediately thought of the character from that book as I was reading Kendra. I was like, okay, so he only has one way of writing these main female characters, and they're mean and awful. So yeah, there is that. Kendra does redeem herself by the end, which is good. But I'm just like, damn, these characters are just like exactly the same. We really get to the wacky side of things where, yeah, you do have a war reenactment happening outside. You have this house that's kind of zooming through time. In a way, like, this house won't let them leave, but it will kind of scare them and almost kill them with these dinosaurs and the saber-toothed tigers and the war reenactments that are happening. It's like time outside the house is being changed somehow. That prehistoric jungle, and now this battle that was fought over 200 years ago. Like, yeah, like, I like that idea, but we get back to the dinosaurs, and I want to see if I can find it. Kendra, she is faced with this man-eating dinosaur. She's being chased by it, so then all of Kendra's anger and fear had built up within her, and she could take no more. She needed to explode and let it out. Without even thinking, she gave a howl and stepped forward, whipping around the stick she held in a wicked swing. The end of the branch caught the hunter on the jaw. The wood cracked and shattered under the impact. Kendra felt the shock from the blow all the way up her arms and into her shoulders. The shock made her drop the branch, leaving her defenseless, but it also sent her attacker sprawling. The blow had caught her completely unawares, and it went flying and screaming. And I'm like, a stick? A stick brought down a dinosaur. And that just... do you see where I'm coming from with, like, the whole... we're getting really silly now? It even mentions Jurassic Park, and Jurassic Park is one of my favourite films ever, and the dinosaurs in that are very scary, but they're not scary in this because they can be taken down by a stick. And it's just weird because we had this haunted house story, and then suddenly we're going into this time travel thing. And I'm just like, this is not scary in the slightest. This is just getting really, really silly. I'm kind of wanting to change my rating to this now. I originally gave it 2 stars, but I think I'm going to give it 1.5 because I do think this is my least favorite one so far because it had the best initial premise and just went the complete opposite direction with it. I did like the fact that we had these characters learn their lessons, by the end of it become better people. Kendra learns a lesson from the house. The house itself is just lonely as well. This is the explanation, is that the house is lonely and it just wants people to be there in the house and to not leave it ever. Which is kind of interesting, but contradictory in a way too. Oh my god, like the last page as well, that's just like so ridiculous. I just couldn't. I was laughing at how ridiculous it was. There is a guy called Jeremiah who's been there for 200 years, and he says, "Hate you? Nay, that it doesn't. You'd be of no use to it if you were injured or dead. It needs you as you are, well and intact, and it will make you stay here for the rest of your lives." And I'm just like, okay, so why do we have a saber-toothed tiger, a war reenactment where they're shooting guns at them, and a dinosaur that could kill them? Why does the house bring them to those moments? Why does the house bring those inside? Why does it expose them to all of these dangers that could kill them? And yet, nay, it doesn't want to hurt you. You'd be no use to it if you were injured or dead. Then why does it do that? Why did it do that? It just doesn't make sense. At the very end, Adam just has a talk with the house, and the house talks back. I can be your friend, but on 2 conditions. And the house is like, what conditions? he's given it like this list of things this house has to do for Adam and his friends if they keep coming back and visiting. And the house is like, and if I agree? Yeah, I agree. And thank you, friends. I think that I have learned something this day too. Like the actual house is talking back to them and being like, I've also learned a lesson, friends. Oh my god, it was just ridiculous. Honestly ridiculous by the end of it. Yeah, I think 1.5 stars for this one. I'm giving it that little bit extra on the 0.5 because of the development of the characters and the lessons learned. Okay, the next story, don't worry, is not a bad one. I actually really enjoyed this one, and it's my favorite one so far. I gave this one 3.5 stars, and I also believe that this was an episode of the TV show too, and this one changes it up a little bit from what I've heard. I can't remember the episode, so this felt brand new to me. This one follows Emma and her brother Day. Well, he's called David, but she calls him Day because of when they were younger. That's how he would say his name. And they get new neighbors from Ukraine. But yeah, these new neighbors, there is a dad, a mum, and a young boy. They are called the Browns, and the young boy is called Lex. And Emma instantly thinks something is off with them. They come during the night. There are these weird like packages that are like refrigerators apparently, but she thinks they're coffins. And when the Browns visit people, the people they visit end up getting like a bandage on their neck and they start to feel different and weak and sick. So Emma comes up with the idea that her new neighbors are vampires, and she tries to convince her brother about it too. And what I really like about the story is that Emma is such a great protagonist. She is very active and she really goes towards the mystery, and she actually has some good ideas on how to approach it. So I really like her as a character. I love the atmosphere too. It felt like a lot of this was set during the nighttime, and I could really feel that. Especially since, yeah, Emma is stalking her neighbors and she's watching them and she's like, they're never out during the day, they're only ever out during the night. And she notices that the neighbors do knock on one of the neighbors' doors like once a night kind of thing, and it's a different neighbor, and then that neighbor ends up quite sick. So like there's this whole undercurrent of tension with this. And Emma goes to interview all these neighbors that are coming down being sick, and she's trying to find out like very actively what is actually happening there. And I love a heroine who is so proactive in their story. A lot of the times, especially in the first 3 books, the characters are quite passive in their stories because a lot of things are happening to them. But Emma is like really taking control of the narrative. She's really taking control of the situation and she's going for it. So I really appreciate her for that. And I do quite like the dynamic between Emma and her brother, and also the desperation that Emma needs to protect her family, because one night the Browns do knock on her door and she's worried about her mum and dad and her brother. And there are scary situations happening when Emma breaks into the Browns' house to see if they do have coffins, and she ends up discovering refrigerators with blood in it, and her suspicions are getting Correct. And if this was Goosebumps, you know, R.L. Stein probably would have made it all a joke by the end of it. Like, oh, we were pulling a prank on you. We knew you were watching us and we wanted to make you think we were vampires, but we're actually not. But actually, the mum and the dad aren't vampires. They're working for Lex, the son, and he is a child vampire and he's their master and they're collecting blood for him. So that part of it was very, very real. And gradually you do start to feel like this hopelessness with Emma, because unfortunately, and I was even like, oh no, you know, because her mum does invite the Browns in and they can only get inside if you invite them in. And I was like so invested by that point. I was like, no, damn, we weren't supposed to invite them in, you know. I was getting like really caught up in the story. I literally wrote, damn it, because Emma's mum's like, hello, how nice to pay us a visit, come in please. Damn. Meanwhile, Emma was in the basement of the Browns, and again, it's just like very exciting. There were so many exciting moments that I really appreciated. And then finally, it does happen that her mum and dad and her brother end up turning, and Emma is pretty much on her own, and you feel that abandonment and the desperation in Emma to save her family. There's also a dog called Turbo as well, who becomes a sort of like dog companion to Emma, which I really liked. But then the story did go on a little bit long. This is actually the longest story so far. It's about 150 pages, and they're usually around about 120, maybe less. So it's kind of like about 30, 35 pages more than usual. So it did feel like it was dragging a little bit by the midpoint to the end. But I like the confrontation with Lex by the end of it, and the fact that Emma was, well, she had the whole town on her shoulders. You know, she had to save them. And I really liked the fact that she was able to do that. And even though she was just like a young kid herself, you know, a young teen, she still managed to step up to the plate and save her town and her family. It was like a really nice kind of full circle moment. And one thing I'm really loving about the Are You Afraid of the Dark books is how much of a lesson we learn by the end of it and how much characters change and grow. So really enjoy that. So yeah, 3.5 stars for this one. Could potentially bump it up depending on the rest of the books. I don't think this one like outwardly scared me that much, but I do think as a teen, if you feel like your entire town is turning into vampires and you're the only one able to stop it, that is a scary thought. In the desperation of saving your family, it's scary to think that your family's going to be taken away from you. I do love vampire stories, but I'm not really that scared of them. But I thought it was really well done in this. I'm looking forward to watching the TV show episode to see what was different. I feel like I should have worn this while I was talking about the Tale of Cutter's Treasure, because I feel very piratey right now. I finished the next 3 books, starting with The Tale of the Secret Mirror, and this one does lean heavily into the fantasy side of things. We follow Kim, and her grandmother told her stories about like Chinese dragons and these things that just sound incredibly fantastical, and honestly in any other story I would eat up. And there's also this mirror, and Kim, she has this idea of a mirror Maggie. She seems to be able to conjure things with her imagination and make them come to life almost. Yeah, there is this like mirror Maggie. If you say her name 3 times, she snatches you. And honestly, that premise is terrifying, but this book doesn't really utilize that premise at its best ability. There is a moment when Kim does get snatched by Mirror Maggie and you see that happen, and that is scary. Her hands come out the mirror, she pulls her in, and then the mirror version of Kim is the one that comes out the other side and is now pretending to be her. In a way, it kind of reminded me of Let's Get Invisible in Goosebumps, but I think this definitely elevated that. Like, I do really enjoy the story. I like the idea of mirror people coming into our world and sort of taking over in a way, because earlier, Doug, her younger brother, who is a little shit by the way, there are so many little shit characters in these Are You Afraid of the Dark books, and Doug is actually snatched first, and you can kind of slowly start to see that he is different. She notices that he is eating with his left hand instead of his right hand, and there are really good like moments of things being a bit backward from what she knows. And even when she goes into the mirror world, everything is so backwards, like everything's, you know, reflected. So I like that visual too, but again, it kind of squashes its potential by having it so, well, I guess like the atmosphere didn't really exist and it was quite isolated to just the house and going upstairs and downstairs the house, and there wasn't really too much scary about that. There was actually a really scary moment with the mirror mother, and she tries to trick the kids into thinking that she is their real mother, and it reminded me of Coraline in the other mother character, and that did kind of scare me, so I really appreciated that. Some of the most horrific things happen in dreams, so I don't really want to count them towards the scare factor of this book. It seems like every single book so far that I've read, including the next two that I read, has a dream that's scarier than anything that actually happens, and I'm not a fan of that because that happens all the time in Goosebumps too. I will stop comparing to Goosebumps at some point. I love the idea of like the mirror dying, so that's kind of why the mirror people are trying to come out. So Doug says, I think that once upon a time this house, the mirror house, was just like the real house, and I think that the world outside was just like the real world, but the mirror's getting real old, it's fading out. And I like that idea a lot, but again, you just don't really get to explore that in this. There's just so much dialogue between Kim and her brother that it really does squash any of the atmosphere around them. The mirror people who live here are trying to escape, but we don't ever really see that happen too often. In fact, we only really see the brother and sister and the mother kind of reflection characters and not really anything else outside of that. And again, like, it does land very heavily into the fantasy and magic part of it, which to me is not scary. It's just fantasy, you know? She even says our ancestors were sorcerers back in China, and I guess some of the magic got passed along by heredity, like my getting brown eyes and black hair from dad's side of the family. And she ends up making up the story about Mirror Maggie, and that's how it kind of comes to life. So, I mean, the fact that our imagination can take things into its own hands is a scary concept, absolutely. But it's kind of a bit like The Tale of the Restless House, where the sci-fi and fantastical elements really overwhelm anything that makes it genuinely scary. And when you have a series, Are You Afraid of the Dark, which is supposed to be about like telling scary stories to children, it's like, okay, we're getting into fantasy adventure. There's nothing scary about that. And I am trying to put myself in the shoes of these characters and the age I should be reading these. So I'm trying to put myself in that shoes, and I still think reading about sorcerers and dragons isn't gonna scare me like I think the author's trying to do. Brad and Barbara Strickland, which rings a bell. I believe they have written other novelizations of TV shows. Yeah, Mirror Maggie is defeated by saying her name backwards and smashing the mirror, which is fine. It was a bit of a quick ending, and it does lead to Kim and Doug getting closer as brother and sister, which is always nice to see. And I'm going to talk more about the moralistic messages of these books when I talk about book 7, because I do think that's at the point where I'm like, okay, I'll talk about it then. But yeah, this was an okay story. I gave it 2 stars. I like the idea of Mirror Maggie and the mirror world, but it just didn't utilize it the way I think it probably should have. All hope is not lost with book 6 though, The Tale of the Phantom School Bus, because I really enjoyed this one. This one I think is my joint favourite so far, along with the vampire story, so this one has a 3.5 stars out of 5. And I love this sort of urban legend ghost story kind of feel of this. I think I'm always going to gravitate more towards the ghostly stories of the series, more so than anything else. I think that's probably why, again, I was so let down by The Tale of the Restless House, because it was presented as a haunted house story, and it just kind of didn't deliver on that. But this one definitely delivers on the whole idea of this ghost story that permeates this town. So we follow Joey, and he's moved to this new town, and one day he needs to get to school, but there's like this really thick fog, and he ends up getting this school bus that just drives by and stops in front of him. So he gets on, realizes the bus driver is kind of odd looking, and the kids on the school bus look kind of old-fashioned, and they're silent, they're not really saying anything. And he sits down, and then he realizes that it's a phantom school bus, and he tries to get off it, and he does manage to get off it just as the bus goes over a cliff. And it's like very dramatic, but it does land into this ghost story, or like this real story that happened, I think it was about 30 years before, where a bus driver, I think his name was Pete Bonner, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Mr. Bonner. They said he was drunk that afternoon. He ran the bus all over the road and finally went over the cliff and exploded when it hit the bottom. And Joey is now living in old Mr. Bonner's house. So this whole encounter has definitely rattled Joey, and it seems to be haunting him. He can't really sleep very well, and the idea that the school bus might show up again is terrifying him. It would terrify me too. And so we have a book where he's trying to figure out what's going on. And again, it's kind of like the main protagonist of the vampire story, where where she takes an active role in finding out what's happening. And I love protagonists that do that. The ones that kind of control the narrative rather than the narrative controlling them. So Joey, he does have an active approach. He interviews people, he talks to the local police officer, and there's also a vice principal who was a witness to what happened 30 years before. He was in the papers, and he just want to talk about it. And it seems like there's something very suspicious there. And it's kind of nice that the whole ghost story and the urban legend ties into the overall mystery, and I think it has like such a good resolution and a natural resolution too. It just all comes together by the end of it. And this was written by Brad and Barbara Strickland again. So they also wrote the Mirror story, which these two felt like such different stories, and one of them definitely felt way better written than the other one because all of the threads just connected beautifully. The whole story with the vice principal being the only eyewitness, and the real story coming out that the bus driver wasn't drunk. He was trying to avoid the vice principal, who I think he just passed his test, but he lost control of the car and he was going all over the road erratically. So it was him who was the one going all over the place. And the bus driver, he had two options. Either he'd hit the car and all of them would die, or he could drive the other way, but it would take him over the cliff, and at least then someone would survive, which would be the vice principal, who was only a 17-year-old boy at the time. Or was it 19? It was one of the two. So even though there was like this ghost story about Pete Bonnet and how awful he was and, you know, that whole legend, it's so nice that after 30 years his name has been cleared, and it's a nice kind of ending. It was quite beautiful, really. But the atmosphere itself in this book was really good too. The whole Phantom School Bus, the fog, and we are also gearing up for Halloween too, so it's fall setting, and there are some nice touches in like the leaves of the place and just little details like that that I really appreciated. Also, what I really appreciate about this as well is that there wasn't really a moralistic message to learn exactly, other than to like tell the truth, I guess, and like be honest. But it didn't overwhelm the spookiness of the story. And again, I'm going to get more into it in the next book. But yeah, I just really like the idea of the Phantom School Bus. I thought it was really, really good. So the last one I read yesterday was The Tale of the Ghost Riders, and unfortunately I really did not like this one. This one I only given 1 star to. It's definitely my least favourite so far. This one, there's nothing scary about it, and even the Ghost Riders aspect of it was very minimal. The majority of this book was essentially, bottom line, about this boy just trying to get revenge on this man. So we follow Josh, and his family is kind of ruined by a certain man who, well, I feel like it's not illegal. Like, it's kind of a tricky situation, especially since now I'm an adult and I can see things from an adult perspective. So Josh's family couldn't afford the house they were living in, so they couldn't make the payments. So they were kicked out of this house, which, you know, like as an adult, I'm like, okay, they couldn't afford the house. They should probably downsize, get somewhere where they could afford. But it did lead to the death of his father, and then his older brother, for months afterwards, would act erratically, he would act out, and he ended up getting himself killed in a car accident. So there is like this legend of the Ghost Riders in this sort of like, almost like a Wild Wild West setting, which I did like. I like things like Red Dead Redemption and stuff like that, so I did kind of like the setting and the atmosphere of it. There was this whole like desert kind of vibe, and the Ghost Riders are kind of like on the front there. You have people riding horses that sort of appear to people who do bad things and make them change their ways. Otherwise, they will join the Ghost Riders and ride forever. Which, when you like boil it down to the fact that they are just trying to teach people to be good, is like, okay, then what's scary about this? So yeah, the entire book is literally just about Josh and his best friend, and they have a terrible friendship, by the way. It's really just about them terrorizing this older man who took the house from them, essentially. And again, like, it wasn't illegal. And yes, it did lead to some awful things, and the man himself is not that nice a person, sure. But yeah, it's just, it's essentially one big book where they're trying to pull pranks on this man. And the Ghost Riders come at the end, and then Josh is like, oh, I'm going to change my ways, I'm going to be a good boy, I promise. And the Ghost Riders are like, okay, we believe you. And then they go. I'm just like, okay, that's it. You just promise them that you're going to be a good boy, and that's it. The man that they were terrorizing, he does end up having to go with the Ghost Riders. Yeah, I believe he dies and he is with the Ghost Riders now. And I just find that a little bit, because yeah, they did terrorize this poor man. Even though he wasn't the nicest, I don't think he deserved death and to be riding with the Ghost Riders forever for what he did. Yeah, he was a dick, but death was a bit extreme. And Josh, who was terrorizing this man and pushed him to where he went, he gets off scot-free, you know? So it's a little bit like, But what I will say is that this is a point now where the moralistic messages of the series are overwhelming the spookiness of the stories. It's almost every single book, the characters have to learn something huge by the end of it. And by that point, the fear factor of these scary stories have lessened. And I definitely think in this one, since the entire story is about ghostwriters that tell you need to be good or you're going with them, and you can say to them, oh yeah, I'm going to be good, and then they just go off, it defeats the purpose of this being a scary story. If every Are You Afraid of the Dark book is going to have some big message that we're building up to, half the time that is good, and I have enjoyed it sometimes, especially with the brother and sister dynamics of previous books, where one of them treats the other one awfully, and then by the end they get closer. Love that. But yeah, this guy, he was just terrorizing an old man and then said he would change his ways, and that's it. You know, I felt like that's what the entire book was building to, rather than it actually being about the Ghost Riders, which is what I was more interested in. So unfortunately, this was like a huge miss for me. It could have been way better, but unfortunately was not. Yeah, just like even at the very end of the book, you have this like declaration of this brother to his mum, like, oh, I'm gonna be a good boy now. And you have this really big happy ending, and you're like, okay, was I supposed to be scared at all during this? I don't think I was. And just the fact that this entire book was just pulling pranks on this old man is just my least favorite thing, because Goosebumps does that a lot too. I feel like this is hopefully the bottom of the barrel and we're just up from there, because I don't want to be negative about these books. I do hope that we get more gems. It's very easy to feel sorry for the main character of The Tale of the Deadly Diary, because she has this really evil younger sibling, and this is a recurring element in a lot of these books, especially targeted towards teens. I think authors assume that a lot of teens reading these books have an evil sibling, which honestly I kinda did, so this would have catered to me perfectly. And yeah, we follow Beth, and she has a younger sister called Karen, and the name definitely makes sense. Beth is quite a lonely person. I mean, she has friends, but she considers her diary to be her safe place. And her sister ends up reading through her diary and reveals some like things that a teen find incredibly important, such as this crush that Beth has on someone at school. And like Karen is just like evil, like she's awful. She spreads the rumor about it, and she even like rubs it in her sister's face, leading to Beth destroying her own diary because she's that distraught. And it's like honestly heartbreaking. There's a mother in this, and there was mention of a divorce or like a separation between her and the father. So obviously that leads into a lot of like family drama, or at least like family issues backstage that you don't ever really get to touch on in this story. Like it's never really addressed again. So I do feel like though still it adds some depth to the characters and how they're feeling. And I guess I mean, this was before Karen could really remember anything, so like I can't really say that her actions are justified because she's going through something about her father not being there. When she didn't really know her father, it's mainly Beth who is like more traumatized by it all, and yet still her younger sibling is terrorizing her still. So I do feel really bad for her, but yeah, she ends up coming across Dr. Vink. And I totally forgot about this. I've been rewatching some episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark? And Dr. Vink is an actual recurring character. He appears in a few episodes. He was also mentioned in an earlier book, The Tale of Cutter's Treasure. And it totally went over my head then because I hadn't quite rewatched the show just yet. But he's in like the first ever episode. And he is this mad person who has this shop called Odds and Endings. And he gives you an item that fits you and you alone, and nobody else can really have it. So we do have Beth coming across the shop, getting a diary from him, but this diary turns out to be rather evil. And she's writing in it trying to scare her sister because she thinks her sister's going to read it. So she's writing things like, oh, these like goblins and gremlins are going to come and they're going to terrorize my younger sister and stuff like that. So there are things in it that ends up coming true. So we have that kind of element. That's kind of the plot of this. But also the fact that what was actually the scariest thing about it, because yeah, again, we have someone who's trying to get revenge on someone, which is like such a huge thing in the 90s apparently, because it happens in 90% of Goosebumps books and it's happening in 90% of the Are You Afraid of the Dark books. There is an element of revenge, and this is definitely something that a lot of characters have to overcome, which is fine because it does add to that moralistic messages that we end up learning about these books. But yeah, we do have Beth trying to stop herself from writing these awful things in it, but every time she tries to write something positive in this diary, it doesn't take. As in, like, the ink runs out, nothing appears on the page. But if she writes something a little bit evil, then that does work. And it's a really great book in terms of the atmosphere and the setting, because there is this snowstorm that ends up happening that she kind of writes into the diary, and it is really isolating, and yeah, it feels great. And I also think this is set like round about Christmas time. Karen, there's no one at the window. That sound is just the snow. It's coming down like a real old-fashioned blizzard out there. Listen, you can hear it now. And Karen thinks that it's little men or like the goblins and gremlins that have been written into her story. So it's kind of like, what can you believe? Like, what can you trust? Like, is it the sound of snow or is it the sound of little gremlins and stuff like that? So stuff like that really does get under your skin, and I really appreciated those moments. And even just saying like the mark in the snow was a handprint, not the print of an ordinary hand. This one had 2 thumbs and 4 fingers, twisted and strange. And you know, it's kind of becoming more evident through the snow that these goblins are real and they're coming. And there are just like little touches of this that are really creepy. In Sinister, tonight the goblins are going to come inside. They are terrible and inhuman. Some flap and some flop, some ball and some squall, blah blah blah. Their claws are sharp and their hunger is great. And what if those horrible things were coming inside the house? You know, things like that, like almost like a home invasion of these scary looking things. I do love the cover art of the Are You Afraid of the Dark books after a certain point. I think the first 6 books had a person on it, and those covers are fine, but I do like the illustrated versions because you can see Beth's diary there, the goblin on the front cover too. It's very sinister and creepy, so I really do like the covers, and they really do reflect what's inside. And I know I say things like, oh, I'm not a big fan of when it turns into fantasy, which does happen in the actual show too. Like, I'm starting to get my memory back on it the more I'm watching of it, and that's fine, but they're never my favorite episodes. I like the creepy and actual scary ones. But yeah, Beth ends up going to the goblin dimension by the end of this, and she has to sort of overcome that and return to her own world through Dr. Vink's shop to destroy them, and she does end up doing that. There was a good little twist ending as well. There was this recurring motive that when you lock something out like the goblins, you might lock something in. And it does appear that maybe, just maybe, she has locked some goblins in the real world. Yeah, I kind of like that too. So I'm going to give this one 3 stars. I think a lot of it was very, very good. I wasn't the biggest fan of the moralistic message by the end of it because it implied that Beth was the one who had something to learn when she didn't. She was being terrorized by her younger sister. Her younger sister was invading her privacy and her safe space. And yet it was Beth who kind of had to suffer the consequences of that, and learned by the end of it that she has to be honest about her feelings, when honestly she's always been honest about her feelings. She goes to her mum all the time about the times that her little sister terrorizes her, and her mum doesn't really listen to that. So if anything, her mum and her sister were the ones who should have learned something from this experience, not Beth. So I didn't really understand the whole trying to make it so that Beth had to learn something. I mean, yes, she does go into the whole revenge aspect of it to try and scare her sister. That's obviously not great, but you know, she was backed into a corner. She was desperate, and I kind of sympathize with that. It's a little bit like, I think it's called Revenge or Us in the Goosebumps series 2000 series. So it's a little bit like that, and again, I'm going to stop comparing. One thing I appreciate about these Are You Afraid of the Dark books is each one is feeling so different to the next one, and they kind of explore really different kinds of fears. In this one, The Tale of the Virtual Nightmare kind of explored the fear of the internet, and this was written, what, in 1996? So this is like when the internet was really early on, and you didn't have a clue half the time about what it kind of did or the implications of what it could do. In this one, I think explores it pretty well, and it really captures some of the fears of like artificial intelligence and taking over the universe, which kind of is still relevant to this day. So I appreciated this. I'm only going to give it 2.5 stars though, because I do think a lot of it meandered, and it really did start to feel like the other one where they got like doppelgangers. The Tale of the Secret Mirror, it felt very much like that, which was written by Brad Strickland. This one's written by Ted Peterson. So I don't know if maybe there was like some cross-reference there. We have Sam and Katie, they get like sucked into a computer and a kind of virtual version of themselves replaces them in the real world to try and get more people to get sucked into the virtual world, almost like a computer virus made real, which is a great idea and a great concept, but we kind of just landed into the whole doppelganger, evil twin kind of stereotypes and recurring motifs, so it didn't feel brand new or original there. I liked the scenes where Sam and Katie were in the virtual world and it felt like space. One of my other fears is just how big space is and how tiny we are in comparison in the universe, and the whole idea of the internet and the virtual world being like the real world and space being so vast. Yeah, the internet is so vast and it's still growing, it's still expanding, and you know, it's just like there are some scary ideas explored here, probably just not to the best that it could have been. But I do understand that this is a teen book written in the 90s, before we kind of understood a whole lot about the internet ourselves, so I kind of have to give it credit for that. But Sam is obsessed with video games. I guess it leans into the whole being addicted to video games can be bad for you if you spend too much time on the computer doing virtual things and not living in the real world. So there are some like messages there that you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper to uncover, which I didn't mind doing. I liked when Katie first realized that Sam was trapped inside, because, you know, we have an alternate version of Sam in the real world and Katie isn't quite sure whether or not that is the real Sam or not. But it seems like whenever we have this like takeover of like doppelgangers, of like mirror people or virtual viruses, they seem to do the pettiest childish things. So in this one, the virtual Sam just changes the grades of one of his enemies. And I'm just like, when you're an artificial intelligence, a computer virus made real, the first thing you do is change someone's grades. It's just, there are way more evil and sinister things that you could have done, you know? And I just feel like it kind of missed the mark a little bit by not going the extra step for how terrifying a real life computer virus could be in the real world. It toyed with the idea, but I think it lacked an execution. Saying that though, again, like, I loved the exploration of like cyberspace. So cyberspace is like your imagination. It's always growing in all directions at once and it's never completely finished. It's constantly unfolding and changing. And imagine being trapped in something like that. It's terrifying. Honestly, the implications were definitely more scary than what we actually saw. And it did get a little bit bonkers by the end of it too. Like, we feed into the whole like imagination side of it. They turn a chair into a butterfly and fly on a butterfly kind of thing. And it's like, okay, fair enough that your imagination can take you places on the internet. That's absolutely fine. But like a butterfly in a scary story about, you know, a computer virus taking over the world or trying to get other people to be sucked into the computer. We're focusing on chairs turning into butterflies. It's like there are different things you could have done there that could have been scary, like actually scary. It's like half the time these authors forget that they're supposed to be trying to scare us, and instead are like, oh, how can we lean into the fantasy side of this? And there were a couple of cybernetic insects, like a giant spider creature appeared at one point, and I'm like, that's more like it. That's great, you know, I'm scared of spiders. This is great. Play to my fears, and that's kind of what it did in certain parts of this. Yeah, and then I did write, very Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, because when they're, again, trying to escape the cyber world, they're in this like big kind of garden area and then they get to a cave, but there is these huge insect things, and it did feel very Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So I wrote that in there, just giggling away at myself thinking and it is a bit anticlimactic. Most of these stories are anticlimactic. All she has to really do is use her mind by the end of it. Katie, she has to use her mind and her imagination to overcome the fake versions of them in the real world, as well as jump out at just the right time so that they swap back. Yeah, use your imagination. Think of the code word you need to use is sad. I probably would have given it a 3-star if the ending had been a lot more exciting, but it is what it is. I have to come to the conclusion that a lot of these are going to be very easily solved. It is what it is. Firstly, I found in the Tale of the Curious Cat this, I mean, I got most of these secondhand, well, I got all of them secondhand. Most of them off eBay, some off eBay books and other places on the internet where I could find them. But there was this Mickey Mouse Clubhouse card that I think whoever owned this previously used as a bookmark. And I just love when I get a secondhand book and it has something like that inside it, because it just feels like a memento of the previous owner, and it's like being handed down, and it's somehow managed to find its way into my home and my home library. So I love that. I love that. And this is a good story. I hate being negative, and I don't really want to be too negative because, like, again, not the target audience anymore. These were written in the 90s. This one follows Natalie and her younger sister, Carrie. Natalie is very curious. She absolutely loves to, well, not exactly loves to cause mischief, but she does cause mischief by letting her curiosity take over. And, you know, as they say, curiosity killed the cat. And they end up coming across this store that's run by a sort of witch person, which, again, I love the visuals. I love the character designs in this. They are described in a really good way. And it's written by Diana G. Gallagher, and I do like some of her other books. I'm sure she wrote some Charmed books. And while there, Natalie, she isn't supposed to pick up this wooden cat that's next to this real-life cat called Shadow, I believe it was called. Sorry, I read the 4 books just back to back yesterday, so like some of it's blurred into one. And yes, so this wooden cat is next to this black cat, and it says on the wooden cat, do not touch. Do not touch. And what does she end up doing? She touches it. She picks it up and she scares the black cat. The black cat runs out in the middle of the road and gets run over and killed. So she is kind of to blame for what's happened because she let curiosity take over. And the owner of the cat, the owner of the store, she comes back and she's mortified. She's devastated that her cat is dead, justifiably as well, might I add, as the owner of 2 cats myself. If somebody murdered one of them, even by accident, I would hold the biggest grudge against them for life. And this woman wants Natalie to pay. Well, she gives her like a bill for what she owes for the wreckage of the shop, as well as like she just wants her to admit fault as well. But Natalie won't admit fault. She's like, oh, it was my fault, it was my fault. And so we can see exactly what we're building to. We need Natalie to learn to take responsibility for when things are her fault. And I do think this book explored that very well, as all of the Are You Afraid of the Dark books do. They always have good character work and good messages to learn by the end. She also gives her like this warning: if the cat comes back to life, then she will have paid her debt. Wanda's Arts and Crafts, that's what the shop was called. And Wanda says, you've never had to pay for the harm you've caused other people in the past, but this time you will satisfy your debt. So honestly, I was on the side of Wanda, the owner of the store, the owner of the cat. I'm on her side during this. Like, yeah, she does need to figure out and learn a lesson. Yeah, she needs to admit when she's done wrong, because she's done this to her friends too. She does things recklessly without thinking about them because she's just curious to see how it would go, and she never once apologizes for anything that does go wrong. She does have like some really bad character traits that, again, like does get rectified by the end. So yeah, she ends up getting the wooden cat. Follow the instructions on the bottom of the wooden cat by sundown tomorrow and I'll call it even Wanda. Turn the cat upside down, turn the collar 3 times round. When the cat walks from the grave, all debts satisfied and paid. So it's very ambiguous, you know, it's very vague. You don't know what that means or entails. So I think the biggest chunk of this book is just spent like being paranoid about what's going to happen. Nothing really scary does happen. It's just Natalie thinking something might happen until one night when her friends, well, when she's with her friends, their worst traits come out even more. So one of her friends is very lazy, so he falls asleep and won't wake up, essentially. Another one is quite vain, so he loses his hair and his appearance gets all ugly. So like things like that start to happen, and it's only when Natalie is like, please don't hurt my friends, please just hurt me, I'm the one to blame, it's my fault, that's when things kind of stop. But there isn't really any kind of scary moments with a cat, which is kind of what you would assume just from the cover. I was wrong to take your bail, but you're wrong too. I'm guilty and I'll pay, but please make everyone else okay again. And then Wanda, she does see that she has changed. So it's a little bit like the Tale of the Ghost Riders in that regard, where they realize that the main characters aren't going to cause any more harm, so they're like, okay, we're just going to go off now. I kind of like the morals that we learned. But again, every single book has the exact same path, where the moralistic message kind of overwhelms the scariness of the story, or sometimes lack thereof, and I just don't think this one was that scary. I'm still going to give this one 2 stars because I still liked some of the writing. I think it was still very well written, and the characters definitely came a long way. And it was also refreshing as well because the little sibling was the more mature one and was telling Natalie not to do these silly things, so that was a refreshing change. Not everything is negative, though. Not everything is negative. I did very much like and enjoy The Tale of the Zero Hero for different reasons. So this one I ended up giving 3 stars. And I'm going to say right now, I didn't find this scary. I didn't find it scary. There were things that did play into some fears, but I didn't find it all that scary. But I'm still giving it 3 stars because I think it's well researched, I think it's well written, and I think overall it's a good story. So this one follows Simon and his family. His family move into the family home of his dad, of Simon's dad, which Simon had never been in before, I don't think. So it's like his first time in the house. He's kind of bummed about leaving his own family home to live in his old grandfather's house. So his old grandfather, I think it was his great-great-grandfather or something like that. His great-great-grandfather fought in World War One, but there is a story about him being a coward. He ran away, he went back to the village, the town where he lived, and he lived in shame for the rest of his life, and in guilt too. So the descendants of this coward from World War One, his effect on his ancestors, the guilt and the shame, has like plagued the entire family. So Simon even gets it from school. There are people who go to his school who know of the story. In fact, one of them is related to somebody who Simon's great-great-grandfather knew and worked with in the war, who were best friends. And now Simon is getting plagued by a ghost that's coming into his bedroom at night. And when Simon gets up from what seems to be a nightmare, he is transported to World War One. And this is when like this story gets really interesting because, well, one, I love the transition too. You know, when Simon wakes up, he steps out of bed and it's mud. His carpet is now mud, and then he's like suddenly in World War One. I love those transition scenes. I thought they were very well done. I love the exploration of World War One, the trenches, the smells, and the feelings of fear amongst the men in the trenches. I think it was very well researched. I think the author, John Peel, I think this is like his 3rd or 4th one now. I do feel like he researched pretty well in order to get a sense of how it felt to be a soldier in World War One and the feelings and the anxieties and the fears of that, because I felt scared too. One of my worst fears, like if I lived back in the early 1900s or, you know, during World War One or World War Two, is being drafted into war and not having a choice in the matter because, yeah, a lot of people or the majority of men didn't have a chance or a choice not to fight in the war. Because I think if you deserted, if you refused, I think it was punishable like, as a crime and things like that. So a lot of people didn't have a choice. So they're like thrust into all like these young men who have never fought anything in their lives, and their lives are now on the line to fight in this war. It's a scary thought, and it still happens to this day, I guess, in certain countries. And I just can't imagine like the fear that I would go through to be forced to fight in a war that I wouldn't be able to fight in because I'm not a fighter. I've never held a gun before. I don't know how to use one. So to be thrust into that is a terrifying thought. So it played into those anxieties, and I think this book did it brilliantly, like the fears of the men who were forced to partake in war. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And Simon, he has to try and change the past so that his great-great-grandfather doesn't live in shame and guilt, and that should also be done by a certain time. Otherwise, Simon himself and his family will fade from existence. So there is like this ticking time bomb on the story. There are stakes involved. While it's not like conventionally scary in that sense, it is a scary thought, and I appreciated that aspect of it. The tension brought into this story was very good. And it led to some like really nice moments by the end too. As I said, like sometimes the moralistic messages overwhelm this story, but I guess when the story itself was focusing on righting the wrongs of the past and like the fear of that, it kind of felt natural. It felt like an earned conclusion to the story, so I really enjoyed that aspect. So I gave this one a 3 stars. I probably would have given it more if it had actually been like terrifying. I mean, yes, there are scary visuals, you know, of gunfire, being in the trenches. Those are very, very scary. I don't know, I guess I'm just expecting something else from the Are You Afraid of the Dark books. Also, when he's brought into World War One, people can see him and he can talk and converse with everyone there. And when he first arrives there, the soldiers in the trenches are like, wait, what's a blooming kid doing here? You know, I love the fact that he was incorporated into the past rather than him just being a spectator, questioning whether it was real or not. It was real, and I enjoyed it. There are maybe some plot holes due to the whole time travel aspect of it, and I never try and think too deeply into that because time travel does confuse the life out of me sometimes. Nothing else to say about it, but definitely I think my favorite of the bunch that I read yesterday.
hear my ass chickens. Very funny. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. I call this story The Tale of the Hungry Hounds.
What I love about this book as well, and again because I love getting secondhand books, is that, I mean, one, it has, I think someone's surname, Chin, on the top there, but inside, I don't know if this is like from a home library or an actual library. It doesn't have any library stamps on it, so I think it's a home library, but someone's put this little like envelope in the front, and then a sort of borrower's card. No one ever borrowed it from this person, but it does have, you know, the date due, the borrower's name, the room number. You know, it just, I love stuff like that. When I was younger, I used to pretend that my home library was an actual library, and if people wanted to check things out, they would have to run them by me. So I really like that. Probably the best thing about this book though, unfortunately. This was another one where it just wasn't scary. It leaned way too heavily into fantasy. It was about mermaids and Typhon and King Triton, and it felt very Little Mermaid in a way, but just not scary at all. So I'm gonna give this one a 1.5. I don't think this one was the worst one so far, but it's definitely one of my least favorites. And while I liked some of the visuals about the ocean and like how treacherous the ocean can be, and as much as I really did like the personal dilemmas of the main character and her family situation, I'm just, I'm not exactly sick because again, I'm still enjoying my time reading these. I'm just wanting more scariness, which not a lot of these are doing. However, you know, I am going to update you on 3 books today, and the last book that I read yesterday was a 4-star. It's my favourite one so far, so not everything is negative right now. But with The Tale of the Shimmering Shell, we follow Glynis, and she has a new stepmom, and her children have kind of like come to live with her and her father, so it was just her father and Glynis, but now her whole world has sort of changed because she's welcoming in a new family, and she isn't very receptive to the new family, and it's kind of heartbreaking to see how much she struggles with it because so many people go through that, so many children go through that and have a hard time adjusting to change, especially with a new stepmom and like step siblings. It is hard, and she is definitely rejecting her stepmother and her stepbrother, who is called Todd. So even though Todd is calling her sis, she's like, that's not my name. And you know, she's really rejecting them, and it is heartbreaking. She even says to her father, like, why do I have to share so much? I'm sharing you, aren't I? And stuff like that. It is very heartbreaking. So she is definitely on a journey of learning. She definitely gets more bratty and more nasty as the book goes on, but I feel like in part that is to be blamed by the shimmering shell, as the title suggests. So there is this shell that's caught in a tree, and we soon find out that there is this whole like mermaid community, and this shell is trapping someone called Typhon, who is evil. He is an evil merfolk, mer creature thing that should not be released, and it's been calling to Glynis because of the resentment in her heart. So it definitely ties into that, and I thought it was beautifully done. And there's also this old woman who lives nearby called Alcina. She turns out to be a 100-year-old mermaid, or hundreds of years old, and Todd has been talking to her. We get a lot of scenes where they're talking about shells and the history of shells, which was, I'm not gonna lie, very boring. I'm sure it was well researched, but it was pages upon pages of the history of shells. I was bored by that. I could kind of relate to Glynis a little bit, because even she was like, this is kind of boring, like, I don't want to know about this. And I had to be on her side for that. So yeah, there was like this fight between Alcina and Typhon. She is hurling magic at him, and Glynis does smash the shell, which weakens him too. And it just wasn't scary. It wasn't scary. It felt like fantasy again, which again sometimes is very fine, but I really wasn't that all captivated by the overall story in itself. The whole mermaid stuff, the shell stuff, the Typhon stuff, the King Triton stuff, Alcina stuff, just none of it really interested me. So unfortunately it's quite a low rating on this one. Right, The Tale of the Three Wishes. I have a story behind this one. This one was very hard to find, and I had a lovely subscriber called Eleni reach out to me, and she even sent me this postcard and everything because she found it in a store in Canada and offered to send it to me, which was so lovely. Thank you so much. I did pay for it, don't worry. I didn't get her to do it for free. But there is like this really lovely note that I'm keeping inside this book forever. But not just that, the main amazing thing that she did was the book was damaged, like it was missing some of the cover, and she herself drew the rest of it on this piece of cardboard, and it kind of slots in on this cover, so it completes the cover, which is so cool and amazing. Like, this makes it the best book in this collection. Unfortunately, I didn't love this book itself. I gave it 2 stars, just to let you know. But this is definitely one of my favorite books in my overall collection ever. The amount of effort she went to, all of this was just so incredibly touching and amazing. So thank you so much. If you're watching this right now, this vlog is dedicated to you. I love you. Thank you. This vlog would actually not be possible without you, because if I had to be missing just one of these books, I could not have done a complete series reading vlog for it. So thank you. I really do appreciate it. But yeah, this book, it was very superhero Marvel thing, which was quite prevalent in the 90s actually. I didn't realize just how much until I read some Goosebumps books, and there were quite a few Goosebumps books that dealt with superheroes and comic book heroes, which, you know, sometimes can be a good thing. This was a bit of a mash between Attack of the Mutant by R.L. Stine and Be Careful What You Wish For by R.L. Stine too. There was like this element of this, not exactly a genie, he's a dragon, where you have a dragon in this instead of a genie, and he gives this young boy 3 wishes. Back it up a little bit though, Duncan, he is a very average boy, and he's sick of being average. His dad actually used to be a fireman, and he unfortunately died in a fire, which, again, heartbreaking. A lot of these kids have such tragic backstories. It's feeling very One Piece right now. And he's sick of being average. Everyone else is better than him, essentially. But he loves comic books, and he goes to a comic book store. The owner of that store turns out to be a writer for, I think it was called The Masked Avenger. Again, like, all of this is kind of blurred into one. Midnight Avenger, sorry. I believe that's kind of the similar name to the Attack of the Mutant book, or some other Goosebumps book. But the Midnight Avenger, and yeah, he meets the author. The author tells him about this other world, and that he is inspired by this other world to write, and introduces him to this dragon who gives him these checks. And I did kind of like that system, the wish system, because this dragon gives Duncan these 3 checks, and he has to write down his wish and sign it. And he has to really think about these wishes. And the one catch to it as well is that these wishes have to be interesting. So Duncan has this idea that he wants to be a hero because, again, he's average. So he starts to become a hero. People see him as a hero because he saves a chihuahua from drowning. So instant 10 out of 10 for that. And then he ends up wishing to become a superhero. So he ends up becoming the Midnight Avenger. And there are some small battle scenes. There are some action heavy fight scenes with these villains, and not one bit of that interested me. I do love Marvel, or at least I used to. I was a huge fan, but the past few years I've kind of fallen out of love of Marvel in all things to do with superheroes, so I think I'm just superhero fatigued. Maybe that kind of plays into why I didn't love this one that much, but I still think that as an Are You Afraid of the Dark book, again, there wasn't really anything that scary about it. I did like the twist on the wishes, even though nothing really scary happened there. Some of the villains that he had to fight as the Midnight Avenger were a little bit scary, but I think the few times they happened kind of similar to one another. The chapter would end on a cliffhanger of Duncan being trapped, but then he would always come out of it and win. It does end up devolving into some dragons helping Duncan, and I even wrote here, cool but not scary. And I did like the way that Duncan overcame the dragon that was giving him the wishes. He was quite smart on it, so I have to give him props for that. He was a smart character, and there wasn't really that much of a moral to learn or lessons to be learned in this one, which I also appreciated, because I do like them when they are in the books, but pretty much nearly every single book has them, so it's nice to change it up a little bit. Unfortunately, didn't love it, but I love this book itself and how much it means to me now. So again, thank you so much, Eleni. I really appreciate you. Okay, The Tale of the Campfire Vampires. I know I've been negative on a lot of these books. I'm sorry, but this one was actually so good. It was actually exciting. It was actually scary at times, and I'm going to give this one a 4-star. The first 4-star of this video, and it's what, book number 14? I only have 9 left. So we have these legends of like Wendigos and vampires, and we have Zeke and Doug. They are cousins, and Zeke and Doug don't really get along. They kind of don't want to be near each other, but they're off on this camping adventure, and camps do scare me. Camping outside does scare me. Ever since hearing about the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders, for instance, and I bring this up pretty much every year since the first time I heard of it, I have been terrified about camping outside because of what happened to those poor girls. So there are so many moments in this where it feels like they are, even though there is, you know, a full camp of people, it feels like they are alone, and it feels dangerous, and it actually feels like the kids are in danger, which is something that I've been missing from these Are You Afraid of the Dog books. The kids just don't feel like they're in danger half the time. So it's actually quite nice in this one that the danger was so real, and I was actually scared that some of them would actually die. Like, it was that intense. But Zeke and Doug, yeah, I can't remember which one, but one of them did find this mound of rocks, and there is this whole like symbols from years and years and years ago, and he moves one of these rocks, he leaves and stuff, but this is kind of how the Wendigos kind of get unleashed, and these like scary creatures. It's kind of misleading because it says the campfire vampires, but there aren't really any vampires in this. It's mainly Wendigos, and these Wendigos are terrifying creatures. Well, this chaos starts to ensue at this camp, and even though there are other people there, Doug and Zeke end up getting split up from everyone else, and there are scary, tense moments in a canoe that happen. There are scary, intense moments when they are all by themselves in the dark, and they find a cave, and they have to like survive. Like, these things are genuinely scary and upsetting. Creeping down the log like a panther came a Wendigo with murder in its alien eyes. You know, there are just so many things about these blood-sucking cannibal demons that really got under my skin and really creeped me out. And also, actually, something that I haven't really mentioned that often is that a lot of the times, and this happened in the TV show too, which is fine, but a lot of the times the danger doesn't really come into play until like the last third of the book. And considering the books are like short enough anyway, it isn't that much of a problem, but it usually does take until about page 60 or 70 for things to really start moving. But in this one, things move at a breakneck pace from nearly the word go, so it's kind of nice to have a book that's almost entirely exciting. So that was a really nice change too. So yeah, this is kind of when the Wendigos are unleashed. So soon a hole was torn in the ancient mound. Pairs of white hands jutted into the night, scrambled frantically at rocks, and deep inside the mound, yellow lights like distant fires flashed and ignited. Then the light source throbbed, pulsing like the beating of a human heart. ... And it's just so scary. It's so scary. So it was really, really good. Like, as I'm saying as well, like, I'm a 31-year-old man, but again, these books can be scary to me. We also did have like a pretty exciting climax of like defeat the Wendigos that involve this big fire tower, and the atmosphere, how the weather is like thunder and lightning and stuff like that. Like, that was really exciting. But also a thing that I really enjoyed too is the whole lessons that we learned again in this. So we do have Zeke and Doug as cousins. They don't really like one another, but they're forced to work together throughout this book, and by the end of it they become a really good team and they enjoy hanging out with one another. So it felt like that story goes hand in hand with the main horror of the story rather than the other way around, because it does feel like a lot of these books, they lead to the morals that we had to learn, the lessons that we had to learn, rather than focusing on any of the dangers or the horrors that got them to that place. So I'm always going to appreciate these kinds of books where we have that moralistic message, but we also have the horrors that lead us to that, and that makes it feel like a natural conclusion for those characters' developments. So really appreciated that. Very well written. It's my favorite one so far. I have never hated parents as much as I do in The Tale of the Bad-Tempered Ghost. They were pretty much abusive and neglectful. They were just awful, absolutely awful. And what makes me more angry, and I will get into the plot and things, is that by the end of this book, and even at the end of this book, they never apologize for their behavior to their son. We follow Danny. His dad, he ends up knocking him during this book at one point. There we go. The stairs were too narrow for all three of them. In his haste, Danny's father bumped against him and knocked him aside. Danny stumbled and his wrist cracked against the handrail. Your sister needs us, Mr. Fenton shouted over his shoulder. Why didn't you call us immediately? You've literally just abused your son. He's literally just hurt his wrist. It literally says Danny stumbled and his wrist cracked against the handrail. Danny cradled his injured wrist against his body. He's like, ugh. Oh my god, this entire book, I wrote so many things about like how much I hate these parents. They made Danny like Cinderella essentially, and he could never do anything that was good enough for them. They gave him so many chores, and the way that they spoke to him as well was just so abusive. And then at the end, all they do to fix the relationship and stuff was like the mum is going to bake him his favorite cake without saying sorry, and his dad, because Danny wants to like repair a broken bike, and it's his birthday soon too, but his parents are just like, they don't even care, they don't give a shit, and he gives him this old bike that he can repair instead, so that it's kind of like a birthday present, again without apologizing for what he did to his son this entire time. Same with the mother. So Danny, he does have a new baby sister, and his new baby sister is sick, and yes, parents are stressed. You know, they have a new child, and the older child is feeling neglected, and they don't get the attention much anymore, so his feelings are very valid, especially considering how much these parents treat Danny, the poor soul. They treat him so badly. His feelings were so valid. And these stories do have like that whole moral message that these characters have to learn something. I swear, Danny did not have to learn anything, because again, his feelings were very valid. It was his parents, if anything, that should have learned. And even though at the end they do say, oh, we've been so hard on you, again, without apologizing, not one part of any of this is saying sorry. Your dad and I haven't thanked you for how much help you've been. Where's the sorry? Where's the apology? The father says, Mrs. Lewis told me yesterday that maybe I was being a little hard on you. Not maybe, you were hard on him. You were abusive. After I cooled off, I realised she was right, so this morning I called the city recreation department and convinced them to let you play in the summer baseball league, because earlier in the story, his dad wouldn't let him join the baseball league, and it was like the last day for them to do it, because his dad wanted him to be around to do the chores, while the dad went off doing whatever he was doing. So it's like, it's not good enough. Like, take accountability. Say sorry to your son for literally breaking his wrist, abusing him, being so awful to him. Every single time that Danny tried to, well, they kept making him clean the basement and the attic and things, which was, spoiler alert, contributing to the sickness of the sister because of like asthma and stuff like that. But the parents were so stupid and awful that they didn't even realize that, and they kept making their son do these awful jobs that adults should be doing, not a child. If these areas are that dangerous as it appears to be, then you should be doing that yourself. Why did they let the basement and the attic get as bad as it did? They just frustrated me so much. They should not have children. I'm telling you, they should not have children. Child services should be getting involved in how they treated Danny. Yeah, this story, there is a ghost that feeds off bad energy or like negative energy. And, you know, Danny's feelings are tied into that, which I did really like how that kind of manifested the bad-tempered ghost. For that, I gave it a 3 stars. I did still think this was good, even though I was so frustrated and annoyed by the parents. They made me hate it so much, but I can recognize a good story when I say it, you know? I still think it was a good story, and maybe it was the author's intent to rile us up as readers for like the unfair treatment of Danny. That is a recurring theme, is like how unfair everything seems to Danny. He has a new baby sister, and now he doesn't get any attention from his parents. In fact, they treat him so differently that they start abusing him. You know, things like that. It's like, his feelings are valid. His feelings are valid. He does meet a girl, Abby, and I'm so glad he has Abby actually, because she helps him kind of escape his situation with his parents, and they go off to like a graveyard and they try and find out who is haunting the house. And there is like this whole ghost story about like there was a fire that killed some people, and they randomly find a skull, and in burying that skull it kind of helps. And also Danny letting go of his emotions helps also with the whole situation, with the ghost manifesting his feelings to all of this ghostly activity, which again, I still don't think Danny deserved anything that happened in this book. He didn't deserve to have to learn a lesson. There was a nice moment between Danny and Abby's, was it her grandmother? I think she was living with her grandmother actually during the summer. And there was a nice talk between Danny and her, and it's nice to have an adult to talk to about these kind of situations. And it does seem like Mrs. Lewis does help de-escalate the situation, and that's kind of why the mother and the father calm down at the end. And also they do get an answer for the sister's sickness, which was asthma. So I love that he did have an adult to talk to, and an adult actually helped in that situation. I think that's very important for any child who finds himself in this kind of situation. Oh my god, it's just, oh, my blood was boiling throughout this. It was like, it's just a standard ghost story. I still liked how everything was tied to his emotions. Honestly, I think just every annotation I made was just how much I hated the parents. Oh, they just blamed him for so much. Oh my god, I just hated them. I need to stop talking about this book because I'm just getting angry again. And even like, who's angry now? It's me. I'm the one who's angry. And I think that was the whole point. So I'm still giving it a 3-star. I still think it was pretty good. Unfortunately, going from a 3-star to a 1-star with the Tale of the Souvenir Shop, I found this so boring. So boring. Essentially, we follow Emily and Juliana. They are sisters, and Emily loves writing stories. And her parents, they go into like this cave thing. Like, they are just on vacation. They go into a cave while Emily and Juliana go to the souvenir shop. And the guy who runs the souvenir shop, he's extremely weird. He's like, oh, come into the back room and stuff. There's something I want to show you. Oh, I need to take a picture. Stand still. It's so weird. Like, red flags everywhere. And he ends up trapping them in, well, what first seems to be a life-size snow globe that is given to these giants that need these girls as a sort of sacrifice to their queen. And they do have a girl already called Wendy, who is the souvenir shop owner's granddaughter, and he hasn't seen her for years because of it, so he's giving them, Emily and Juliana, in exchange for Wendy. And Wendy ends up helping Emily and Juliana escape the snow globe, escape the giants. It's so boring. It was so boring. That's essentially all that happens. They get trapped. Wendy helps them escape. The end. It's just, honestly, I was just so bored. I don't even think I made that many annotations in this because I was just reading this like, is something going to happen now? Is something going to happen now? And it did end up going into that really silly territory. The giant family line flat on the floor spoke in unison. Hail, immortal queen, leader of leaders, giant of giants. I just didn't find it scary. I didn't find it interesting. I didn't find it fun. I didn't find it entertaining. Did I say I gave it 1 star? Yeah, I have nothing else to say about this one. I felt barely anything. Barely anything. I do think Emily was a good protagonist though. She wrote little stories at the start of this book that were actually kind of good and interesting, like better than the actual story itself. So I wish her the best. I hope she becomes an author one day. And I seem to only read like 3 books at a time each day. For some reason, I did have a lot going on yesterday too. But one thing I love about this used book is just like the other book, I can't remember which one it was actually. The one that had the envelope at the very start and somebody was using it as if it was like a library thing with a slip. Well, someone's done it with this one too. But they've put like this sticky thing at the back and a little slip that has The Ghost Cruise by David Cody and Bobby G.G. Wise. And like, again, nobody borrowed it off them. I feel sad. I feel sad that they didn't borrow it off them. And this one was in the back, not the front. I did get these from different places, so they were owned by different people, I think, before getting sent to me. So it seems like a lot of kids in the 90s would, or even like the early 2000s, would pretend that they had a home library and do stuff like this, which I think is so creative, so fun. And I love that. I'm keeping it in. This one I enjoyed so much more than the previous ones too, and I'm going to give it 4 stars. I think it's maybe my joint favourite at the minute. Maybe I prefer the Campfire Vampires a little bit more because that was more exciting throughout and more action-packed and adventurous. But this one was very exciting too, and the danger again felt very real. So I seem to really gravitate towards the Are You Afraid of the Dark books that have like real danger, and at least the feeling of real danger and fear. So this one follows Norris, and he is aboard a ship. It is his great uncle's ship. It's kind of their family line. About 100 years ago, maybe less, the ship had gotten wrecked and there were 17 deaths. And over the years, it's like being repaired. It's like made brand new. It's almost like a totally different ship now. But it seems like the ship is kind of haunted. And what I loved about this is that there were moments in this when the first wreck when those 70 people died, were getting reenacted by the ship itself. So Norris and, he meets a girl called Merle, and she seems to experience it too. Like, she can see a ghost of a 13-year-old boy, and it seems like the ship is like reenacting that wreck. There's also a seance on this that further enhances that, which was really exciting. And just the setting itself was very exciting too. I love the fact that it's out on a ship. It's kind of scary. Like, again, you're probably going to see so many of my fears in this. I'm kind of a little bit scared of the ocean because it's so vast and so big and you don't know everything that's lurking under the waves. And to be on a ship in the middle of the night, for instance, and especially since what happened to the Titanic and other shipwrecks, anything can go wrong. So I love the atmosphere of this. I love the way it's set up. The horizon tilted to the left and to the right, rising unnaturally high before peaking weightlessly and sloping away from sight. The prow of the Osprey stabbed up at the infinite blue sky dome as if yearning to cleave the clouds and sail the heavens. Then it gave up the attempt and vented its frustration by slicing the rolling waves, digging deep to gouge the blue waters of the Pacific. The great ocean, half a planet wide, took no notice of the toy ship on its mighty back. You know, it's just like so much of the imagery and the way that this is written was so fantastic. So yeah, David Cody Weiss and Bobby J.J. Weiss did a really good job with this one. What else did they write again? They also wrote the Tale of the Shimmering Shell, which I did not love. Yeah, that's the only one they've done so far. So that one I did not like. This one I really liked. So it's very, very different. But yeah, the atmosphere was great. I love the setting of the ship. So yeah, there was this 13-year-old cabin boy who died on the ship. So they're being haunted by that. They need to try and help him to rest. So it was a little bit of a standard cut and paste kind of ghost story too. All they need to do is just hurl this wooden fish overboard and honor the dead, which felt like a Ghost Whisperer kind of episode, which I love because I used to love Ghost Whisperer. I love ghost stories. I don't mind if they're pretty simple as long as they're still entertaining and fun to follow, which I thought this one was. There were so many moments of description of the ship, like the upper promenade, the lower decks, the prow of the ship. It just felt like we were exploring this massive labyrinth of a ship. And there were also creepy moments with the ghost too. So silently the book on the desk closed itself and the desk arm swung away from the bed. As the boy snored, invisible hands took the blankets around him and turned out the reading lamp. And just the idea of a ghost like kind of tucking you in, and like it just feels like a violation. It feels really creepy to me. So there were like little moments like that sprinkled through that I liked. But it was mainly the setting of the ship and all of that. And this was a story, I haven't mentioned who tells the story in each book, so I'll probably add that in post. But this one was told by Gary. And I like Gary's stories. I think he's such a good storyteller. And it really does feel like the Midnight Society is telling the story. And with each of them telling a different book, I feel like some of them really do fit the character and the kind of story that they would tell. But I would have to rewatch the entire show to get a sense of the characters again and their kind of storytelling styles and genres that they like to explore before making any of these bold statements. I'm glad that this was a 4-star. It restored my faith in the previous one that I read, the Tale of the Souvenir Shop, was just so boring. I think this was like one of the most expensive books too. Let me double check. Some of these books cost a lot of money, and I think the Tale of the Souvenir Shop might have been the most expensive. Yeah, it was. This one was £65 on its own. The Tale of the Ghost Cruise was £55. This one was only £3, which is what, like $5? But honestly, some of these were extremely expensive. The Tale of the Secret Mirror was £46. So yeah, this was the most expensive one, and it's 1 star. It was not worth the money. Hey everyone, it's been a glorious night. I didn't get to sleep until like very, very early this morning. I did do a really late live show with my friend Murphy last night, and it was so much fun. Like my voice is a little bit like strained today. We did a lot of shouting, a lot of laughing, a lot of shouting, but it is a really gloomy, rainy day today again. And I've read 4 more books in Are You Afraid of the Dark? I read 4 yesterday. I was just feeling inspired and I just wanted to keep reading. So now I only have 2 left. But let me tell you about these books first. Tale of the Pulsating Gate. It was fine, less than fine. I didn't give it the best rating, but it did have a lot of promise. The premise was really good too. I think if this, I mean, I know Are You Afraid of the Dark did go into a lot of sci-fi kind of elements in the TV show too, so it isn't a surprise. This one dealt with the multiverse and what happens when you enter it and those consequences, and it is a little bit scary when you think about entering something that you have no idea how to get out of. So Scott, he is a young guy, and there is this guy called Julio who really looks up to Scott. He wants to be his friend, but Scott is trying to push him away. Scott himself is a bit of an outcast, and he wants to get better like at being social, and he wants to raise his social status in school. So talking to Julio is gonna affect that, and so he pushes him away even though Julio really wants to be his friend. So just off the bat we see a character who's quite flawed, which again, it's a recurring thing, which is great. Scott and Julio, they are made for one another in terms of like friendship. They both love sci-fi stuff, so it was really sweet to see Julio really try with him. So Scott has a grandfather who is kind of known as a bit of a whack job in this town, like that's what they call him. And Scott is constantly trying to ignore that. And his grandfather has made this gate, this pulsating gate, in this wall at the house. And Scott sees his grandfather go through it one night. And then he comes back out of it, but he seems quite injured. And Scott tries to help him. So Scott also realizes now as well that something is up with this gate. It's pulsating, it has this green glow. So he ends up stealing this like magnetic key card that he needs for this gate from his grandfather and decides to go in himself. And it is a portal into the multiverse. And each time he goes through the gate, it takes him further and further away from his actual reality. And nothing scary happens in that because the only things that change, because I really do like the way they set it out. So apparently, if you go through the gate and you go into the next multiverse, like each multiverse is pretty much exactly like yours, but it will have little tweaks, little changes, like little decisions that were made differently. And then each time it'll be a little bit more different each time. So I'd imagine you'd have to go through the gate 100 times for things to be like really different, because the changes that happen each time he goes through are just like so minuscule and again not scary. There is no element of danger there with what he deals with. It's just school stuff. He decides to go to a party in the first multiverse that he goes to. That's pretty much it. And you know, people don't like him still, and people think he's like odd and weird still, and that's the only thing that happens when he goes through the portals. And I I just don't find that interesting, especially since it was all about just his school life. And again, just like a decision to go to a party is something that changes, and that's about it, really. And the way he comes back is really bad because he doesn't know how to get back to his normal time. And this was when I was a little bit scared because I was like, oh, you know, each time he goes through the portal, he gets further and further away. So how does he reverse that? How does he get back? So that was quite scary. But it turns out that the third time he goes through just automatically takes him back to his actual place and time, because that's what happened to his grandfather. His grandfather went through 3 times and just got back to the beginning. And I'm just like, that's it? That's it? All you had to do is go through it 3 times and be back to the start? Like, so I found it so anticlimactic and not a scary story whatsoever. Who told this story? Oh, it was Gary, which I'm kind of surprised at because Gary usually tells really good stories. Because the one before, I think it was the Tale of the Ghost Cruise, Gary also told. And that one was really good. It's one of my favorites. And also, Diana G. Gallagher, she hasn't been right. I'm not the biggest fan of her Are You Afraid of the Dark books. I love her Charmed books, or at least some of them. And I think she did some Sabrina books, but her Are You Afraid of the Dark books just have been misses. Absolute misses. Because I think she did the Tale of the Curious Cat, which I gave a decent rating to, but I didn't love it. So, yeah, unfortunately, a 1.5 stars for the Tale of the Pulsating Gate. And then the next 3, okay, are actually really good, okay? They have good ratings. I'm not all that negative, because The Tale of the Stalking Shadow, I ended up giving 3 stars. This one follows Hadley, and what I like about Hadley is that she wants to be a carer for an old woman who lives in this haunted mansion. It was like Vermilion, is it? Valemon. I keep saying Vermilion, and I don't know why. Mrs. Gladys Valemon lives in this really run-down mansion, and it's a really great setting, very atmospheric. And Hadley, she is so intriguing right from the beginning because I wasn't sure what it was that she had to learn, because as I say, like a lot of the characters do. But yeah, there were like little moments like this where Hadley is thinking, or at least like it seems like she has multiple voices in her head. Like that's not a plot point or anything. A lot of us have conflicting voices on our heads. But hers says, if they only knew the real reason you're doing this, you're anything but a good little girl, Hadley Herring. Remember that. And I was so intrigued. I was like, wait, hang on, what? What's the backstory here? And we don't really find out about it until maybe partway through the novel, which was a really good angle, a good story too. It added so much to her character. So I really liked Hadley as a character. And yeah, it turns out the reason that she is doing this, being a caregiver, is because with her grandmother, she passed away without Hadley saying goodbye. She watched her grandmother deteriorate and she thought it was her fault because she was a young girl and she didn't know better. It obviously wasn't her fault, but she held the guilt and she didn't get to say goodbye to her grandmother. It's so sad. This is actually probably like one of the saddest Are You Afraid of the Dark books so far. So it added so much emotional weight to it. And I should probably give it a higher rating than 3 stars. It's a high 3 stars, okay? Mrs. Valemon also seems to be haunted by this like shadow thing that comes from the mirror. And Hadley says it, the person before Hadley saw it, and oh god, my coffee almost spilled. Oh my god. My heart. I almost pooped myself there. Just have a coffee so I have it balanced on the sofa. I shouldn't be doing that. It's on the table now. It's safe. Yeah, okay. So as I was saying, she says, I thought her sickness was all my fault. I know that's silly, but I thought it was true, and so I lost the chance to say goodbye to my Grammy. I feel so bad. Ever since then, I've been afraid of all things. That's sort of dumb, but I guess that's just how my mind works. I thought taking this job would cure me. Maybe it will. And honestly, that's such a real, raw fear, and something that just there are so many levels to it. And I'm telling you, as much as I love Goosebumps, these ones have definitely been much better written in terms of character development. You will never see anything this heavy in the Goosebumps books. You might get a character whose parents are going through a divorce every now and then or something, but the majority of them are so surface level and the characters never really get fleshed out. Whereas the Are You Afraid of the Dark books, oh my god, the best things about them are the characters and their development. But yeah, this one was a little bit spooky. The creature, the shadow creature from the mirror is quite scary. And also I really like the way that Hadley defeats it because she ends up putting two mirrors together so that it feels like it's probably gonna be stuck going through the sort of like mirror world. But she was very smart, she was very proactive. I'm so sad as well because, spoiler alert, Mrs. Valemon dies at the end. And I'm like, oh, that's so sad. But like, she did know about an accident. This is one of the reasons why she was haunted. And this shadow demon thing was actually her guilt. It was Mrs. Valemon's guilt. And her sadness just manifested. So there was, touching on depression and having something on your shoulders for so long that you want to get it off your chest, a little bit like the Tale of the Zero Hero. And I really liked the exploration of that. So we had Mrs. Valemon. There was some kind of dam thing that Mrs. Valemon knew would break, but because of greed and because it wasn't in the best interest of the rich, she never really said anything. And then I believe some people lost their lives in the accident, and Mrs. Valemon went through her whole life not telling anyone. So she does come clean and she does die. It's so sad. It's like actually quite brutal for a kind of young teen children's book. But it was so good. I really like it. I always love ghost stories, so and it wasn't really exactly a ghost story, it was more like guilt manifested, but there was some like moments of potential hauntings, and I like moments like that, so yeah. Next, I have The Tale of the Egyptian Mummies. This one I gave 3.5 stars. I really do like Egyptian mythology. I like things set in Egypt. I do have a trip to Egypt next year, which I'm really excited about. So I just loved the mention of the afterlife in Egypt and what they believed in back in the day in the Book of the Dead, in Egyptian witches and things like that. It was so interesting. That's the thing. Remember the Tale of the Shimmering Shell? We were getting so much backstories on shells. That was so boring. Well, in this one, we were getting backstory on Egypt and mummies and witches and the Book of the Dead. And I was like, this is so interesting. This is like a little bit creepy, a little bit scary. So it makes sense to have this history embedded in the story. But in the Tale of the Shimmering Shell, there was nothing scary and there was nothing interesting about the history of shells, which lasted pages, by the way. It was pages upon pages. I'm not being over dramatic, it really was. But in this one, it just kept the intrigue so high. So we follow Annie and Laura. They are best friends, but about 6 or 7 or 8 months before, Laura moved away with her dad. So now Annie is coming to visit Laura for the first time. I really love the exploration of their friendship and the kind of what distance does to a friendship. Again, it's like so different to a lot of the explorations of other friendships in previous Are You Afraid of the Dark books. I love this series. It's so good. I know I'm not giving everything a great rating, honestly. I mean, 3.5 stars is a good rating for this, but I really do genuinely love how these stories are written the majority of the time. Okay, so back to Annie and Laura. So in the place where Laura lives, there have been two college girls gone missing, and Laura's dad has these Egyptian mummies. These two Egyptian mummies that were given to him from a museum to study and to do tests on. And spoiler alert, the dad is not involved in anything, by the way. The Egyptian mummies are real and alive, and they were two witches who never got to go to the next world in like the afterlife in ancient Egypt because they were banished from Egypt and they died outside of Egypt. They were executed. So now they're trying to get to the next world, like the afterlife, and they need two hearts that are light in order to do that. And I love the way that it explored that and the way it was weaved into Annie and Laura's story. And you can see Laura's changing too. Her arm looks like it's like rotting, and the witches, the Egyptian witches, have given Laura this drink. And there are some moments that were so terrifying when Annie and Laura are in bed asleep, and then Annie will wake up and she'll see like one of the Egyptian witches, which is like this like bandaged mummified thing over her or over Laura, and that is terrifying. Can you imagine waking up in the middle of the night with something just looming over you? Another thing I love about this is that these aren't fake. Like, it isn't a fake dream. Like, she woke up and it was all a dream. Nothing like that. Sometimes that does happen a little bit, but not to the extent of like Goosebumps, for instance. This one, again, I will shut up about Goosebumps. In this one, it was real. Like, the mummies were like standing over them. They were trying to give them this potion, and they're trying to switch them and take their bodies so that their hearts are light enough to go to the next world. And the two kidnapped college students, I don't think their hearts were light enough, so they were released eventually, which was a terrifying side storyline in all honesty, especially again for an upper middle grade young teen book. But yeah, moments like that is scary. I remember a story of, like, I don't know when it happened, who it happened to, but I remember a story of, I'm sure it was a school trip, and there were loads of kids assigned to rooms in this like place where they were camping, and there were 5 girls in one room, and one of them, I'm sure they were like teens or older teens at this point. There was like 2 bunk beds in each room, and the 5th person like lay on the floor in a sleeping bag. And one night, one of the girls woke up and could hear another girl like moaning and like making some noise, but she thought nothing of it, so she went back to sleep. And then the next morning, turns out that that girl was murdered in the night by someone who'd broken in. And like stuff like that terrifies me and creeps me out. And it just reminded me of that story when Annie woke up and saw the mummified corpse thing. It's just, it honestly does freak me out so much. But anyway, back to the actual story. Annie and Laura's friendship does win out, and the Egyptian mummy witches are defeated by the end, and I just love how Annie and Laura managed to do that. They were really proactive, they worked together, even though there was some strain in the friendship because of the distance, because of the way Laura was acting. She seemed like she was possessed, and she was starting to get possessed, so, but it was just so good, okay? It was really, really good. One of my favourite Are You Afraid of the Dark books, 3.5 stars. And then I was like, you know what? I do have plenty of time to read another book. In fact, I probably could have read all of the books. I could have read the next 2 books yesterday too. But I think there is a limit, you know, there is a limit. This book, by the way, The Tale of the Terrible Toys, this was the hardest book to get out of all of them. Wasn't the most expensive, it was just really hard to get hold of. And it stinks. Like, this book, it smells like a book. You know, it has that old book smell, but it's a smell that, you know, if you open the book, you might smell it if you have no book. This one just smells on its own. Like, I can smell it from here. I know I've just opened it, but even before that, when I picked it up, I could smell it. This is a very old book. And what I love is that it had one of those library things on it, so it feels like it's in great condition. It had, you know, the slip that goes around it. So you can really tell, like, how old it is and how well the library thing protected this book. Like, are you seeing that? Like, it's so old. But I love the smell of old books, so I'm not complaining. But yeah, this was nowhere for months and months and months. When I started collecting these books, I could not find this on eBay, books. I would put the ISBN number in on Google, on loads of different book searching websites, and nobody was selling it. Absolutely nobody. So I would set up alerts, And then, thank God, one day I got an alert to say that it was getting sold. I think it was on ABA Books. This one was only £4.58. So what, like around about $5, $6? Considering how hard this was to get, I thought this didn't exist. I thought it was a book that was supposed to come out but didn't come out. But no, I finally managed to get it, and it's a good book too. It's 3 stars. It felt a little bit like not exactly a demonic Toy Story, but I could definitely feel the Toy Story inspiration. So we follow Carter, and he is a bit of a lonely boy. He doesn't have any friends. Well, he did have friends, but then he grasped on a couple of bullies who wrecked a teacher's car, and he has been seen as like an outcast since. People bully him, and it's not like, even his friends, the friends that he did have abandoned him because they're like, oh, you're a snake, you tell people things. And it was really horrible to watch because it just felt like, you know, it reminds you, or it reminds me of when I used to be bullied and stuff like that. So it was very sad. So Carter, he ends up going in the attic, and he finds these 3 toys. He finds like a toy soldier, a snake, like a stuffed snake, and a jack-in-the-box, which we have on the cover there. And I really like how, at first, because they can talk, and they talk to him. So it's a little bit like a reverse Toy Story in a way, because, you know, Buzz and Woody, they don't want Andy to know that they're real. But in this one, the toys want Carter to know they're real, and they want to praise him, they want him to be their master, and they shower him with compliments and, oh, we're going to play forever, we're going to be best friends forever and stuff like that. But deep down, secretly, these toys are planning like this disastrous thing. They need Carter to love them forever so that they can stay alive forever, because their previous owner stopped loving them, stopped playing with them, so they kind of not exactly died, but they were put away and they were unconscious, I guess, for the entire time. And then when Carter opened the box up, they reawakened, and so they never want to go back to sleep again. It's a little bit like Slappy from Goosebumps, how he would cause mischief in order to isolate the main character. It's exactly what these toys are doing too. They're trying to cause mischief so that Carter would get in trouble and he would get further isolated, and he would, you know, seek comfort from these toys. So the toys are more like mischievous than they are scary. The Jack-in-the-Box, though, definitely quite scary. The stuffed snake also has poison venom, so that is also, again, scary. Also a little bit sad, though, when you think about how desperate these toys are for love and to be played with, and also for Carter to also be loved and to have friends to play with. You know, it's very sad too. So that's partly why I gave it a really good rating, because I felt like the whole main character narrative versus the toys narrative like really complement each other so well. So Richard Lee Byers, you did a great job with this one. The toys just cause mischief at school, they cause mischief at home so that his parents are a little bit more frustrated with him. I will say though that none of the parents can be as bad as the parents in The Tale of the Bad-Tempered Ghost. In fact, these were really good parents. They were actually listening to him, and even though they thought that Carter was the one causing all the havoc, which in their mind, he is the only other person in the house, so it does make sense that he would be, even though it's not. And they don't go to the extreme of punishing him like they do in The Tale of the Bad-Tempered Ghost, for instance. Like, they are actually more reasonable, and I really like them in this. I'm going to praise any Are You Afraid of the Dark parents, because The Tale of the Bad-Tempered, I've never read bad parents like it before in a children's book. They were awful. Even most of the Goosebumps parents, who, again, I despise a lot of them, they are still better than the ones from The Tale of the Bad-Tempered Ghost, okay? I'm never forgetting them. And Carter makes a friend in Beth. Beth, well, she likes him, and she tries to talk to him and stuff, but Carter pushes her away because he is protecting himself. He's like, okay, everyone makes fun of me, everyone bullies me, I'm just going to push everyone away. It's so sad. But Beth does push through. She becomes his friend, and there is like quite a scary conclusion to this book as well, because the toys end up knocking Beth down the stairs and she gets really hurt. And then when she's leaving, the toys attack Carter, and then Beth comes back, saves him, and it's quite a nice, beautiful ending, but also a little bit sinister and scary. Like, can you imagine this Jack-in-the-Box? Because he can come out of the box too, by the way. I don't think it played up on the fear of this as well as it should have. It was definitely just more mischief and mayhem than actual genuine scares, but I still really was entertained by the story, and I thought it was very well written. So yeah, I don't think there's anything else to say about it. Oh my god, like seriously, it smells so good, but it's very overwhelming. And now I only have 2 books to go. The Tale of the Mogul Monster there isn't really a monster in this, to be honest. It is a little bit misleading. You think there's going to be some kind of Bigfoot kind of monster, but there isn't really. In fact, I need to look up what it actually is. It said something about a Sasquatch or something. Is that an actual thing? It's a Yeti. It's a sort of ape-like creature. Okay, so I guess like Bigfoot kind of... Okay, but right, so there is one, right? But it administers first aid and it saves the characters. It's a good monster. It's a good monster. It's not remotely scary. It's not remotely dangerous or horrifying. The most dangerous part of this book is actually the environment, which is something that I really appreciated and enjoyed. So I gave this one 2 stars. This one follows Dimitri, and he doesn't have parents. He is an orphan, and he does have a trust fund that he's not allowed to get into until he's 18. But he is very well off, and he is at this like sort of ski resort with a couple of his friends, and he is a bit of a brat. He does demand things. He has this sort of advisor person who kind of stops him from having like fun, but the fun that he wants to have is really dangerous and could actually kill him and his friends. But yeah, they're going up on this mountain range, and they do end up taking a different turn, a dangerous turn, and it does get them into some trouble, but they do, you know, find their way back and everything like that. So then they go to like the north range, or like the north part of the mountain, and that's when an avalanche kind of happens again, and it's a little bit more dangerous. They find a cave. There is somebody who's been missing for like a year who they end up finding, and there is a Sasquatch thing that actually helps them, and like I said, administers first aid. So there isn't really like anything remotely scary that happens. That is essentially the plot. That's what happens from like A to B. They go back to the resort and everything's fine. The scariest parts of this book was when they were skiing and there was an avalanche coming towards them, or even just when they first go into the wrong track, which they do on purpose, and there is this idea that there is this like monster that is scary. But yeah, it just kind of didn't give you anything like that. It was just so fine. It was fine. I did like the snowiness of the setting. I like that. It was different. But honestly, other than the setting itself, I've got nothing really else to say. I did feel a bit bad for Dimitri because there was moments when he would feel a bit lonely because, again, like he doesn't have parents and he thinks his friends don't really want to be friends with him for the right reasons sometimes. And he has a fear of being abandoned, which is, like, it's justified. It is definitely justified. But that moral, that kind of thing for him isn't really explored or developed as the story goes on. It was kind of abandoned. His fear of abandonment was abandoned by the author. So I didn't personally connect with this main character like I usually do. So that just let it down a bit, but still 2 stars for the environment, for the ski resort stuff. I thought that part was good. And now the final book, The Tale of the Horrifying Hockey Team. This one was a 2 stars as well. As much as not really a whole lot happened in the Mogul Monster, I think the environment of that book really elevates the story. In this one, it is a little bit frosty. They are doing ice hockey, so again, like we have that frozen almost atmosphere, so I really like that again. But this one follows John and his hockey team. They come across like a lake where they usually play hockey, but there is already a team playing on it that they've never seen before. And literally just before this happens, there's mention of how back in 1949 there were 6 Hillville middle school boys ventured into the woods on a dare and never returned. And then literally on the next page, there were 6 guys on the ice. And I'm just like, that was just so obvious. Like, a lot of the times, these stories are obvious, and that's fine. But, like, this was so obvious. Like, it was painfully obvious that the 6 guys who were on this hockey ice rink thing are the 6 kids who went missing 50 years before. So I was like, okay, that's a little bit on the nose. But I still like the idea of these almost like zombified versions of these boys being here, and they do end up challenging each other to play ice hockey, and the main characters win twice. And then when that happens, the zombie people are like, okay, if you win the next one, you're gonna die, so throw the game for us. And that's what they do. They throw the game for them. It's literally all that happens in this is that they have 3 hockey matches and they win the first 2 and just throw the third one because they're threatened with their life. There was a scary moment when John was, you know, asleep in bed, and then one of the, like, I think it was the captain of the zombified team, knock on the window and says, throw the next game or you're gonna die. You know, that was a little bit odd and creepy, but other than that, like, really, it isn't scary. And it's funny as well because I think it was Frank. Yeah, Frank is the one who's telling the story, and he says, do you like sports? Yeah, so do I. I'm like, no, I don't. I kind of don't like sports. I still try to minimize my dislike for sports and still like this story somewhat. The matches themselves were a bit exciting, so I'll give it that. But it really wasn't anything special to me. But yeah, I guess if you like ice hockey and you like sports, maybe this one would be more your speed. Just really wasn't my speed. And I wish we got more of the whole urban legend of these missing boys who are now like zombified, but all they do is play ice hockey. That's all they do. It was actually kind of sad. And the reason why I gave it 2 stars and not like 1 star is because these boys, when they went missing, like they were like hockey players, but they were not really that good and they never won a game. And now in their afterlife, 50 years later, all they want is to win one game. And I found it so nice of the main character, John, to give them that, you know, and that was like really sweet and a touching moment. But other than that, it really wasn't a whole lot to it. Just 3 hockey matches and done. And it's kind of sad to end on this kind of note, but it's also just sad in general that this is the last one, especially at the end of the book when it says, so you like this creepy sports story? Well, you can come back for more anytime. We're always here at midnight around the campfire if you ever find your way back. And I'm like, but this is the last one. There's no more. It's kind of sad. I mean, I know there is another one that's just come out, I think by Rin Chapeko, but it's like not one of the original 90s TV show tie-in books kind of thing. It's like, it's not part of that. It's like a whole new era. Like, this is like the last original nostalgic 90s Are You Afraid of the Dark book, and I'm just so sad about that. And I do wish we ended on more of a high note, but it is what it is, and you know what? I still enjoyed it somewhat. I'm so surprised by how much I actually enjoyed them. I did think I would enjoy them, but I thought that we would go the route of Goosebumps, and I would end up disliking most of them, but actually, they've been pretty solid. I looked at the... Ash... My cat has just like jumped onto where my fire is. So please be careful, don't burn yourself, okay? So the average overall for the books is 2.5 out of 5. That is average, like that's halfway there. 2.5 out of 5? It's a good rating. Now I'm going to rank all of the Are You Afraid of the Dark books from worst to best. I do have all the timestamps down below, so if you have just skipped to this point, if you want to hear more of my thoughts on each of the books, click on any of the timestamps and I'll talk more about it. I'm just going to list these. So my least favourite Are You Afraid of the Dark book, and in 23rd place is The Tale of the Ghost Riders. And in 22nd place is The Tale of the Souvenir Shop. In 21st place is The Tale of the Shimmering Shell. In 20th place is The Tale of the Restless House. In 19th place is The Tale of the Pulsating Gate. In 18th place is The Tale of the Curious Cat. In 17th place is The Tale of the Three Wishes. In 16th place is The Tale of the Horrifying Hockey Team. In at number 15 is The Tale of the Mogul Monster. In 14th place is The Tale of the Secret Mirror. In 13th place is The Tale of Cutter's Treasure. In 12th place is The Tale of the Virtual Nightmare. In 11th place is The Tale of the Deadly Diary. In 10th place is The Tale of the Terrible Toys. In 9th place is The Tale of the Bad Tempered Ghost. At number 8 is The Tale of the Sinister Statues. At number 7 is The Tale of the Zero Hero. At number 6 is The Tale of the Stalking Shadow. In 5th place is The Tale of the Nightly Neighbours. In 4th place is The Tale of the Egyptian Mummies. In 3rd place is The Tale of the Phantom School Bus. In 2nd place, the runner-up is The Tale of the Ghost Cruise. And finally, the winner, my number 1 of the Are You Afraid of the Dark books, is The Tale of the Campfire Vampires. So here are all of the Are You Afraid of the Dark books, ranked from the best at the top to the worst at the bottom, although I don't think you can really see very well in this light. But these were a very good time, and it was just so nice to go back to the 90s, to re-experience the Are You Afraid of the Dark world, be amongst the Midnight Society, and delve into these mostly spooky stories. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave this video a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already, and I hereby declare this meeting of the Midnight Society closed.